Good evening. This is a special meeting of the Santa Monica Housing Commission. We're going to begin with item 1, which is the call to order, the roll call. Just so folks know, tonight we are, as the commissioners, are handling all of the technical aspects of this meeting. It'll be a little different than usual in that way. I hope you'll bear with us in case we have any technical problems. So I'll call the roll. Commissioner Hamilton.
Here.
Commissioner Kamner. Commissioner Flora.
Here.
Commissioner Hilton.
Here.
Vice Chair Buchanan.
Here.
Chair Soloff, I'm here. So, and Commissioner Hanson. Okay, he is absent. He indicated he had a conflict night's meeting, special meeting time. Okay, that completes item 1. Yes,
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Flora.
I don't mean to interrupt, but unless you want to hear from the city attorney's office, there's a sign behind you that you're going to need to get completely off the screen.
Oh, I tried to move that out of the way. Hang on. That solved the problem?
Yeah.
Thank you. It had been more prominent, but I apparently did not succeed in getting it off the screen. Okay, that completes item 1. Before we go on, well, no, actually, let's do item 2 next, which is approval of the minutes. This is approval of the minutes of the May 20, 2021 Housing Commissioner regular meeting. Are there any commissioners who have proposed amendments to the draft minutes? Do I have a motion?
I have
to approve? Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Hilton.
I have some minimal edits on my motion, and this is page 35A, housing element update. And the motion by me, the first line, it says Housing Commission support. Option B, it should be supports plural. And then the second line, after transit stops, a semicolon, and then lowercase however, and then the rezoning of R1, comma, and take out the second however. So it's just 3 edits. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Hilton. Are you looking at the May 20th, 2021 minutes?
What I received, it says motion by Commissioner Hilton.
Could you look at the top of it? Because I'm wondering whether you're talking about the April minutes, which have already been approved and were attached to the housing element aspect, just to show people what we had done at our prior meeting when we actually had some motions. Because I may be missing it, but I'm not seeing what you're referring to in the May 20th minutes itself. I only see one motion. It was a motion by me, seconded by you.
Well, this is on page 3, and it's motion by Commissioner Hilton, seconded by Commissioner Hamilton, and then Commissioner Hamilton withdrew his second.
Oh, I see it. Okay, at the bottom of the page?
Yeah, bottom of the page.
Okay, I'm sorry. My fault. I missed that. Can you give me again what you'd like changed?
It states Housing Commission support, singular. It should be plural. And then the second line, after transit stops, semicolon, with a lowercase however. And then it says the rezoning of R1, comma, and take out the second however. So it's just 3 edits.
Okay, do you want to make a motion to adopt the minutes with your suggested changes?
I motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting, May 20th, with the suggested edits by Commissioner Hilton.
Okay, I'll second that motion. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Hamilton?
Approved.
Commissioner Kamner?
Yes.
Commissioner Flora?
Yes.
Commissioner Hilton?
Yes.
Vice Chair Buchanan,
Yes.
and I'll vote, Chair Soloff will vote yes as well. So that passes 6-0. That concludes item 2. We're now on to item 3 on our 3A on our agenda. That's the housing element update. Discussion of the draft 2021-2029 housing element and possible action regarding recommendations to council. Commissioners, before we get into public comment and discussion of this item, I want to report out advice received from the city attorney. And so, as you know, and the members of the public may know, that we received a number of inquiries from the public about whether Commissioner Kamner's employment at Abundant Housing LA poses a legal conflict of interest with her serving as a housing commissioner generally, or with her participation in the Housing Commission's consideration of the housing element in particular. The issue was referred to the city attorney's office. The city attorney has advised us that Commissioner Kamner's employment does not pose a legal conflict with her service as a housing commissioner generally, or with her participation in the Housing Commission's consideration of the housing element in particular. Advice was also sought from the Fair Political Practices Commission, which has provided informal guidance that it agrees with the city attorney's analysis with respect to financial conflicts under the Political Reform Act. I wanted to share that information with the commission and with the public. And with that, now we'll turn to the actual housing element update. And the purpose of this is that we had discussed the housing element a number of times. At our last meeting, we were aware that a draft of the housing element would come out after our last regular meeting and before our next regular meeting, which is actually next Thursday. That is why we indicated that we wanted to have a special meeting so we would have the opportunity to discuss the draft, and if there's anything we wish to convey to council as a commission, we could. So I see we have 2 members of the public who have called in and want to speak on this item. So we are going to begin with Denise Barton. Ms. Barton, can you hear? If you can hear me, you are free now to give your comment on item 3A. Denise Barton, can you hear me? Okay, we'll try and figure out what the issue is there. We also have Olga Surikauza. Oh, hello? Can you hear us, Denise?
Yeah, you didn't unmute me.
Oh, you were unmuted already, but okay,
No,
or at least according to my icon. But in any event, it's your time is ready, so when you begin, we'll start your time.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Let's start. Hello?
Okay, Denise, start over again. It appears that what's happening is that even though your individual microphone shows it unmuted, when I unmute the other person's. Oh, I see. Okay, never mind. I apologize. Again, this is the problem that occurred with the technical. I thought you were the 310 number and you're the anonymous. Okay, your time starts when you start speaking.
Good evening. Let's start with the wheel chart for 2019 population by race. In comparison to Table 3 city by population chart, in the 6th cycle housing element 2021 to 2029 existing conditions report, where the wheel chart is below. So if whites make up 64.3% of the population, why was it raised to 65%? Then for Hispanic and Latino, consists of 15.9%. Why was it decreased to 15%? Then for Asians, you have 9.8%, which was raised to 10%. And then for Black or African Americans at 4.3% was decreased to 4%, ending with 2 or more races being 5%, and others being 0.8%, which was raised to 1%. Here I have to take issue with your math and not decreasing the white population to 64%, Hispanic, and raising Hispanic and Latino should be raised to 16% at least. Also, if you look at the 7% decrease in the white demographic and the rise of all of the races in the city, you will also see that the city of Santa Monica is an inclusionary city. Then I'm confused by your eliminating the goal for supportive services for the disabled, which was one of the areas found to be lacking in your fair housing assessment, although there were parts about people with disabilities. And yet I'm seeing many of the program changes is the same as is listed in the 2013 to 2020-21 housing element, although in the sixth housing element there are notifications about lack of staffing, which the programs were not available to the disabled pre-pandemic when there was full staff. I especially have to take issue with the reasonable accommodation due to trying to get it twice and not being able to get it either time at AO Apartments for the mold, and at this location has still not been remediated since I was there in the beginning of 2016, or my present location at the Chelsea, where the white powder is still being put in the common areas of the building, even though staff has now recommended that it be cleaned up, which it hasn't. In addition to this, you might be interested in the fact that my rent for this month was returned as not at this address by management. So I don't know. I continue to be harassed as an affordable housing tenant. Thank you.
Thank you. We previously had Ms. Zurikawa, but I don't see her any longer here. So if you got cut off, Ms. Zurikawa, if you call in again, we'll give you your time to speak. Okay. So that completes public comment on this item. Are there any comments that commissioners wish to offer about the housing element? Commissioner Flora.
Yeah, I just want to, Mr. Chair, I just want to know how you would like to structure the evening. Are we going to go appendix by appendix? Are we going to go? I want to make sure we're productive without, being here till 11 p.m. I just want to get a sense for how you think we should structure this.
Well, to me, the way to structure it is to start with what, if anything, what comments about the draft that isn't just a repeat of what everybody said at prior meetings about this the commissioners have. And then we'll see if there's anything from that leads to actual action items or others. I know there were some folks at the last meeting who said they had some things they did want the commission to take positions on. I don't know whether they have formulated those or not, but I don't know. It may be that nobody has any comments, in which case we can go home, or people will have comments, in which case we ought to talk about whatever items people think are there. I certainly am not planning to comment on, 250 pages of materials line by line. I have some overall comments that I'm going to share, and that's at least where I am. Do you have some alternative proposal?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Commissioner Kamner.
I have a proposal. I think maybe we should go back to the questions that the staff asked us to answer, like with the multiple choice, which I think they brought to us back in April, and just see if, maybe we can vote on answers to those. I think it's pretty straightforward. They're multiple choice. And then maybe we can synthesize the comments from the last meeting into a set of consensus recommendations that this commission has. And so, I can propose.
Go ahead.
Okay. Do you want to start with the multiple choice, or maybe we should start with the consensus items from last?
Whichever way you want to go. This is your proposal, and I'm happy to go with it.
Okay. You all will have to help me if I miss anything, because I'm not in my office with my notes. But So what I have from the last meeting was a set of recommendations on achieving the lower income RHNA and affirmatively furthering fair housing. And so those included asking the state and federal government for funding. So that's one of them. Vice Chair Buchanan recommended that we have diversity and inclusion in the site selection. Multiple commissioners brought up inclusionary zoning as a method. Rent subsidies, I think that was brought up by Chair Solaf. And prioritizing public land for affordable housing, also Chair Solaf. So did I miss any other major items of consensus or that we should visit on here?
Yeah, I don't know what the consensus is. So I guess my question is, so on the first one, asking state and federal government for funding, I mean, there's some vague reference to it. I mean, my comment on the housing element is what's deficient in the draft that we have is that it's missing the entire discussion of what the real challenges are, that unless there's massive public investment by all levels of government, we're not going to actually be able to address any of this. The history of the lack of adequate investment by the county, by the state, by the federal government, and that money needs to be used in intelligent ways. So but that's something that to me is missing from the draft as it's been presented. That's one of my comments. It's just that should be probably first and foremost thing in the entire housing element, because the key focus is the 6,158 affordable housing units that they're talking about and what the reality of that is. So I don't, I'm not sure. This is not criticism, whatever. I'm just trying to understand what we're trying to do here. Saying that we support asking for money from other sources, I'm not sure what that tells the city council as it reviews the draft housing element. But then the diversity inclusion and site selection, I'm not sure what that means. There are very specific issues that have been raised about particular parts of town, about the housing overlay, about changes to R1. There was extensive discussion of that at the Planning Commission. They have made comments. They recommended against the affordable housing overlay and the other change to R1. I don't know if we're going to engage at that level on these issues. The inclusionary zoning, there's specific questions that were put forward where there are claims about what would be required, what heights and densities to achieve certain specific levels, and whether that's what ought to happen, or whether they ought to simply keep the existing ones and lower the interim inclusionary zoning in order to make that, pencil out for market rate projects. I don't know if we mean to engage at that detailed level, but that's sort of the question that's being put to the city council. For me personally, one of the things that's missing in all of this is thinking strategically about how we're going to marshal all of our assets in a way that maximizes the production. I mean, I'm not sure that inclusionary zoning actually, if what we mean by that is have them build a few units in the market rate apartments, whether that's the right strategy versus let's give them and just let them give us the fee and we'll build it on the public land. They haven't done the analysis yet to allow us to do that, and that's something that's going to have to come up. Rent subsidy, it already says that they support expansion of the pod in there, and prioritizing public land. They've already identified the public land sites and put that in there. So I mean, we could say that so I don't know if we want to say something specific about their particular proposals, like we support that. That's fine. I mean, I'm happy to do that if we think that would be productive. But that's sort of I'm just wondering whether we're going to drill down a little bit beyond the very high level to what's specifically in the draft housing element.
You're solid. I'd like
Yes,
to.
Commissioner Hilton.
Thank you. I'd like to.
Can I just hang on one second, Commissioner Hilton? Are other commissioners hearing Commissioner Hilton very softly? Or is that just me?
I hear him.
I
fine.
can hear him okay.
Okay, it must just be me. If to the extent you can speak as loud as possible, my connection must not be great, Commissioner Hilton.
Since our May 20th commission meeting, there was a June 2nd Planning Commission, Planning Department staff report, and there's been significant changes to the allocation called quantified. So I'm going to refer to the revised quantified, and there's two quantified. 10A June 2nd, page 11 is the quantified. And then 10B June 2nd, page 2, which I'll be referring to, is the revised quantified. And I think the reason the quantified is less is there's an apparent credit carryover from the previous fifth cycle. So our allocation was 70% affordable and 30% above moderate. So 10B page 2 revised quantified objective assumes that 40% would be the low income and 60% would be the above moderate. So I'm going to do a little mathematics if I could. So it's on, and again, you should look at page 2, revised quantified, and the 60% above moderate is 3,180 units of 397 per year. The affordable is 2,073 affordable units or 259 per year. So if you take the total, 5,253 residents and 2,073 are affordable over 8 years, you get again the 259 affordable units per year. So assuming the market units, which are 397 per year, assuming that the affordable is 15%, you get 59 units a year as the contribution share. And then our trust fund has 6 to 8 million, which would contribute 30 units. So you add 60 to 30 and you get 89 units. So in the revised quantified, you have 259 affordable units. You subtract the 89 contributed by the AHPP and our trust fund existing revenue, and that leaves us with 170 units, and that would be $50 to $70 million per year, approximately, from some additional revenue. So we'd be 66% unfunded, even in the quantified, the revised quantified. So also I wanted to point out that...
So hang on, Commissioner Hilton. So I'm adding this because I took Commissioner Kamner's list, and I think we can go through each of those topics. But you're adding as another topic you want to talk about is whether the quantified objective calculation is realistic or not. Is that your point?
Yeah, realistic capacity.
Right. Okay.
And then there was mention at the May 20th meeting when the word compliant was referenced, and I'm aware that there's different interpretations, but just to point out that suitable sites inventory is different than affordable housing and the costs associated with affordable housing. And what we're supposed to do as a housing commission is examine the affordable housing numbers, the financials, and what's possible. So, so we'd be 34% of the total revised quantified, or we'd be 170 units, approximately 66% short of what is called the revised quantified objective. So I'm wondering, do any of the commissioners, who some of you have stated we can achieve these numbers, do you have any comment on the financials?
Okay, well, I think to try and keep this, as Commissioner Flores said, and I appreciate what Commissioner Kamner did in identifying 5 topics that we can go through. I'm adding the quantified objective. Do we think it's realistic or not? And we can discuss that as a topic, and whether we want to make a comment on that. And then you also mentioned the suitable sites inventory. I also think that was done inappropriately, and we'll have some comments to make on that. So that's a topic. Are there any other topics people want to discuss? I think the sort of affordable housing overlay piece probably falls into one of the categories we've already talked about. So I don't know if we need that as a separate topic. Are there any other topics people want to cover? And then we can march through them. Commissioner Hamilton?
Well, in thinking of how we kind of organize this meeting and make sure we cover a lot of ground relatively quickly, because I agree we don't all want to be here till 11:30. One strategy I was thinking of is, in the draft housing element, in the introduction, we have a fairly comprehensive list of all the program goals. Some of those goals are, I think there's, going to be broad consensus on much of them. Others may fall into a gray area. And then there's going to be a couple here that are going to be more contentious. And I think that having a recommendation on some of the goals that have have a higher profile would be of most benefit to the City Council, for us to be able to come to a conclusion as a commission to the extent possible about some of these more hot button items. And of course, it's all very subjective as to which one of those would be the hot button and which ones are more benign. But I think that might be, a good way for us to also organize this. And I'll leave it up to you, Chair Stoloff, as the best way to proceed. But going through each of the program goals and deciding if we want to and express an opinion on them, I think could probably add the most value to City Council.
Well, I guess from my perspective, if to the extent people just want to say, yeah, what everybody's already proposing is good, I don't think that's going to add a whole lot. But unless it's something that's controversial. So I wasn't planning, like I say, to go through all of the Planning Commission spent 5 hours after 4 hours the prior night going through, every goal, every program, every whatever. And I don't feel like we would add a whole lot of value there. I agree with Vice Chair Hilton. Our principal role as a housing commission, focus on the affordable housing piece. That's why we exist, and why we're constituted the way we're constituted. If you think that those aren't covered by the topics that were already raised, then we can add them. But I mean, okay. But I really don't have a strong feeling about this. I had some specific comments. I've read all this stuff, listened to the meetings. have specific comments about specific things that I think are important. And so, that's how I organized my thinking. If people want to, I'm happy to go through Commissioner Kamner's list. We have 7 general topic areas. If you think you want to go through that, I mean, why don't we just start with that? And if we haven't covered it, let's add those in. I mean, let's go.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we all agree that there's going to have to be a lot of support from other levels of government besides or I shouldn't say we all agree. I think I agree with Commissioner Kamner. It seemed like we all agree that if we're really going to solve this problem, it's not going to be solved simply by the city of Santa Monica, but all levels of government need to contribute. So to me, the operational aspect of that, for me personally, is that the housing element does not do enough to really make that point, which I think is a central point, that this is the challenge that's before us. We're willing to do our fair share more and in a variety of ways, put up public land, do other things, etc. But if anybody's going to make this real, then you guys got to kick in too, and that has not been historically what has happened. So let's change that. So that to me is what's missing from the existing housing element, and that needs to be put into it, because I think this city has a unique ability to say that, because a lot of other places haven't really done much of anything and haven't tried hard, and they haven't had inclusionary zoning for a long time, and they haven't put their own money into it, and they haven't put their own land into it, and they haven't met their RHNA targets. I think they said there were 10 jurisdictions in the state, that were on track and to meet the prior housing element, and we're one of those 10. So I think we have a unique voice there, and it's important, because if we don't say that, the others can be blown off as you don't try, and the point gets lost. So does anybody disagree with that?
No.
So, okay. Does anybody feel we need to talk about that more? Okay.
No, I think that it definitely should be emphasized, and it's definitely lacking in the element, Mr. Chair. I agree.
Okay, Commissioner Kamner?
Can I make a motion that we recommend to the city council to affirm the need for increased state and federal sources of housing funding in the housing element?
Okay, I'd be happy to second that motion. Could you do me a favor, because we are running this meeting totally by ourselves? Could you just put into an email what you just said, and then send it to me, so that when we prepare the minutes, we will have an accurate and won't have to go back and listen to the whole meeting?
I have to tab.
Why don't you do it right now, and then you can read it back to us. It's not very long. No, this isn't ideal, but since we are all trying to run this totally without any city support, I'd appreciate that. And as people are thinking about other motions during the evening, if you could take upon yourself the same thing, you might even want to write it down, or you say it to us and then communicate it to us.
Okay, so it's to recommend to the city council to affirm the need for increased state and federal sources of housing funding in the housing element update.
Okay. My only, if this would be considered friendly, I'd like to add the county in there as well.
Yes, great.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, we'll take a roll call vote. Okay, Commissioner Hamilton,
Yes.
Commissioner Kamner,
Yes.
Commissioner Flora,
Yes.
Commissioner Hilton. Commissioner Hilton?
Yes.
Vice Chair Buchanan?
Yes.
And Chair Soloff votes yes, so that passes 6-0. Okay. The next topic.
I'd like to offer a slightly amended reference to the city's 3 city-owned sites, which have potential for 100% affordable housing. And just as an initial personal clarification about Bergamot Arts Center, several years ago, I never opposed the residential commercial potential of Bergamot. My opposition was the affordable housing and the adoption of what was called middle class, 130 to 180% of AMI affordable housing. Also, there was a lack of employment civil rights for persons with developmental disabilities who would be employed and get low-income units at the development. My concern was the type of affordable housing, which was above moderate with too little affordable housing. There's now been income changes, and I'm now in agreement with the staff report proposal for those, not just Bergamot, but the 3 sites. So the 3 sites, and here's my follow-up motion to Commissioner Kamner's. The commission supports 100% affordable housing on city-owned sites such as 4th Arizona, the Bergamot Arts Center, and Main Street surface parking lots, while the physical capacity at these sites may be 2,356 units, and local funding constraints could produce less than 1,700 units over 8 years. In order to maximize the potential, the city should explore public assistance or partnering with the private investment.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion? Okay. Hearing none, then that motion fails for lack of a second. I'll just tell you, Vice Chair Hilton, I think it's a mistake at this point to suggest that we're going to do anything on our public land other than 100% affordable. How we develop a plan to make that happen and what we need to do down the road is not something I think needs to be decided at this point, and I don't want to, I'm not prepared personally to open the door yet to the suggestion, for example, that we combine market rate housing on our public land. And I don't think it's necessary at this point. So, okay. But then the next topic that Commissioner Kamner identified, and I think this is going to, I don't know whether it's listed as goals or programs or what, Commissioner Hamilton, but I think this is going to include some of what certainly was more controversial compared to where the Planning Commission came down relative to the staff and whatever. But I think the category that Commissioner Kamner identified this as was diversity, inclusion, and site selection. And I think that probably relates to 3 things in the housing element, but correct me if I'm wrong. Number 1 is, actually I should say 4 things. Number 1 is opening the commercial zoned area to housing. Number 2 is the idea of putting housing on the portion of Montana, portion of Main Street, and the portion of Ocean Park that has not seen housing development so far. Number 3 is the 100% affordable housing overlay in the portions of the city that are not already governed by AB 1763, which is essentially R1 zones with a minimum of 4 stories for 80% affordable housing. And then the 4th is the proposal to allow triplexes essentially in R1 neighborhoods, for lack of a better way of labeling it. So those are sort of the 4 sub-proposals. And those were ones that there was quite a bit of discussion of and the like. So if people want to go through those and see what people's views are, we can do that. That is one that already council has something of a split of opinion presented to it. And Commissioner Kamner, should we do those one by one? Would that be the most effective way to do it? Or do you think we should talk about it as a unit?
I think that you laid out the things I was thinking of perfectly. Honestly, I just because I don't have my notes with me, I was just going to ask Vice Chair Buchanan if she could just sort of explain again, of course, like briefly, just like what you were, when you brought this up at the last meeting, what you had in mind.
I don't have my notes with me either. I would imagine I was thinking about the fact that I don't know how else to say it. I mean, whenever, we're choosing sites for affordable housing, I think that we have to look at those sites that currently do not include a representation of the full community of Santa Monica, where there are sites where there is no diversity, and examine, why that is, and I think do whatever we can to stop perpetuating that. I feel like those who are opposed to the R1 overlay I feel that some are not really voicing their true reasons for opposing it. And for me, that's a problem. And I think that by not pursuing that and perhaps it doesn't have to be to the extent that we've been talking about it, but I think that to completely eliminate it, to not continue to have it, an item that's on the table, it's contrary to what the city's goals are. And I think it sort of perpetuates the discrimination that's happened in this city for many, many years, whether it was overt or not. The city has a long history of relegating diversity to just a certain part of the community and not to the community as a whole. And if the city wants to continue to say that it welcomes diversity, that it cares about all of this, the residents of the community, then it has to take action that shows that. And perpetuating something that started long ago for reasons that are really sort of shameful doesn't do that. I mean, I may be the only person who feels that way, but not having things set up so that anyone who wanted to could live anywhere they wanted to me in this community to me is we'll never achieve the goal of diversity to the extent that the city says it wants to. So.
Okay, Commissioner Kamner.
Thanks so much for those comments. I strongly agree with what you said, Vice Chair Buchanan. Your comments also made me think of another item we should add to this, which is representation in public input and community input on the housing element update.
I'm sorry, can you be more specific what you mean?
I mean, yeah, yes, but I mean, much more specific. I'm just trying to think of like what, like how specific to get for this, but just like ensure that maybe this commission can recommend to the city council that the city ensures representation in the input process for the housing element update.
Well, there's been a long process, so are there specific things about what's happened up to now that you think haven't happened and should happen, and if so, what?
I mean, yes, absolutely. Like I mean, you and I both participated in the advisory committee. I mean, did you think that had diversity and representation, Chair Soloff?
I thought it represented primarily the developers in the city.
Right. Well,
and the people who work for them.
Right. I mean, I understand like that the city was trying to understand like some of the economics of development from the developers, but I thought, you know, we were lacking a lot of perspectives on a bunch of different factors, like including, you know, racial representation, income representation, housing status representation. Like, I just think those are also really important perspectives that need to be a part of the input process. And, you know, I haven't seen that at all.
So I guess my question again goes back to this, because I don't disagree with you that there should be broad input on important things like the housing element. But there's been this process. They've identified all the things they've done to try and give the public an opportunity to comment and whatever. So if we're going to actually be useful to council, I mean, personally, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful in any way, but just saying somehow ensure that is not very helpful. If we have some specific thing that we're saying hasn't happened that we think should be done, that could be something that would be at least worth considering. That's just my opinion. So go ahead, Commissioner Kamner.
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. I think, you know, outreach to the more vulnerable communities in terms of housing in Santa Monica, like specific outreach to those people would go a long way. As far as I know, like
by doing what specifically that was not already done. That's what I'm trying to get at. I mean, I personally haven't gone through. They had their whole list. They have a whole section of the housing element that talks about the process that went into it. I personally didn't spend my principal time focusing on that, but to be useful, I think we ought to say, here are the things you said you've done, and here's specifically what we think you ought to do in addition to that you haven't done.
I mean, I think, like, for example, the city should go out and survey, you know, people who have been underrepresented in this process, like especially lower income people, like rent burden people and unhoused people. So that's like one thing. Another thing they could do is.
So you want them to try and do a scientific, I mean, like an actual real poll, as opposed to, I mean, what they do now is, you know, they send this stuff out and whatever. And I agree with you. What you get back, basically, those limited people who, you know, care enough about this to make comments. And then they, you know, you have all of the meetings and whatever, and it's again, obviously, as with all public meetings and whatever, it's a greater challenge for people who are struggling in their lives to find time to do that. I mean, that was one reason why we moved this meeting to 6 o'clock. It used to start at 4:30 to at least create the possibility that working people could participate. It hasn't actually panned out, but at least we were trying. So we support the goal. But is that there ought to be some sort of actual, you know, scientific survey where it's, you know, actually has some statistical validity and the like? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I mean, I don't think that's exactly what I was suggesting. I think that, I mean, that would be helpful for sure. I was thinking more like survey, like doing, you know, we've lost some more people. You know, like
No,
what the city
Commissioner
does.
Hamilton just turned off his video. We have lost Commissioner Flora, so I don't know whether he's exited the meeting or is having trouble.
Okay, so, you know, well, maybe like starting with collecting data on the representation that we already have in the input on the housing element, and then like identifying demographics that are underrepresented, and then like doing, like, so for example, say like, you know, we don't have many extremely low income residents that have given input. Maybe like sending out a poll or a survey like specifically to those people, you know, at their mailing address, or maybe like going to those people.
Do we know that though? Do we know that extremely low income people have not provided their opinions?
I think that Vice Chair Buchanan, may I say?
May I say something?
Yeah, are you responding to Commissioner Hamilton's question? I mean, you can make a separate comment, but I first wanted to see if anybody knew the answer to the question that's pending.
In some respects,
Okay, go ahead then.
I have personally not seen any statistics that tell us, you know, the income, the housing status, or anything like that of the people who have given their input. But I do know that there are a large number of people who are lower income, people who are unhoused, who don't have access to the internet. So if that's the way you're communicating with people, you're not getting to them because they don't have access. Often with lower income people, because the internet because it's expensive. Although I know that the city's trying to come up with a way to resolve that so that everybody would have access. And I think too, you know, I do know that there are people who, when they are struggling with paying their bills, where they're going to eat, whether they're going to make next month's rent, or if they're unhoused, where they're going to sleep tonight. I'm not sure that just because, you know, people who are unhoused can still have a mailing address at one of the agencies in the area, or they can have a PO box. But I'm not sure that seeing a survey talking about, you know, the housing element, that if they don't see a direct connection to themselves, I'm not sure that it's something that they would think. I know when I was homeless, it wouldn't have been something that would have been a top priority for me to participate in, because there were so many other things that, just being alive every day required. So
let me just read, this is, I haven't read all of it, but there's a section called community engagement. So what they say was, a project website was created to document project progress in regard to public outreach, draft documents, arena, and relevant links. In order to communicate upcoming engagement opportunities during a safer at home order, additional engagement strategies were needed aside from the typical social media posts, newspaper notices, and email blasts. 2 large-scale surveys were conducted at the launch of the project and when the draft concepts were released in order to gather input. Non-digital communication strategies were employed, like the Rent Control Board newsletter and Seascape, a quarterly city publication mailed to every household in Santa Monica. Materials and notices were also distributed through stakeholders and community partners, such as housing providers. While most of the materials were posted to the project website, printed versions and alternate language versions were available upon request. So that's all I know about it from what's there. But anyway, we can. This is a 5th item, but in the grand scheme of things, why don't we just march through the 5 that we have and see whether we want to take any positions on it, right? The first one is, so does people want to take a position on whether or not commercial zones should be open to housing? I personally support that. Is there any, Commissioner Hamilton?
I think we should move forward with a recommendation about that. Absolutely.
Okay. So I will move. Now I'm going to have to send an email to myself. I move that we support the opening of the commercial zoned areas to housing. Is there a second?
Second.
A second.
Okay.
Vice Chair Buchanan can second it.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. Roll call vote. Commissioner Hamilton.
Yes.
Commissioner Kamner.
Yes.
Commissioner Hilton.
Yes.
Vice Chair Buchanan.
Yes.
And Chair Soloff votes yes, so that passes 5-0.
Chair Soloff, I have a caveat to my yes vote. I'd like it entered into the record that the 100% affordable housing in the commercial for seniors, persons with disabilities, and families needs habitable interior sizes and adequate on-site parking.
Okay.
And I say that because there was reference to unlimited or maximizing density and no parking minimums. And we've had comment at our meetings by the 100% nonprofits, and they've said in order to be feasible, their projects have to have reasonable on-site parking.
Okay. So the next of the 5 subtopics here is the proposal to try and make housing feasible on the portion of Montana, the portion of Main Street, and the portion of Ocean Park Boulevard that has been identified under their so-called option B. Is there a discussion on that one? Commissioner Kamner.
I just want to emphasize the importance of this also for the small businesses here in the city that, I just see them struggling so much, going out of business constantly. So I think, obviously that's not, that's not like the primary issue for them, but I do think it's something to consider.
And do you have a view of how that cuts on this issue?
I'm saying, like, in support of promoting more housing in those areas.
Okay, so you like the idea. Okay. Any other discussion? Commissioner Hamilton?
I do like this idea in concept. I have I guess I have a question about how exactly we would be incentivizing housing in these particular areas. I'm not familiar with this topic, so if I'm going to vote on it, I like the idea. I just want to know, how will it be incentivized?
As I understand what staff is proposing, is that this would require increases in, FAR height, whatever exactly it is, in order to incentivize the creation of housing with presumably first floor commercial in the place of the existing, which is essentially first floor commercial.
Okay.
That's the proposal.
Okay.
So on this one, I'm just going to report this. I've had discussions with people who are concerned that these particular shopping areas are iconic, and are concerned about what happens if we change it and whether that affects people coming to Santa Monica to shop and be in these places or not. I guess, to me, if we're going to create affordable housing there, I think that probably outweighs those kinds of concerns. If what we're going to create is just a lot of very high-end market rate housing, I'm not convinced that that does anything either for affordable housing or to meaningfully create the kinds of opportunities that Commissioner Buchanan is talking about, since the so I guess I would support that we put affordable housing in those areas, try and make it for that. I mean, that's going to get to something more broadly that I think we need to have when we get to what the overlays should be for affordable housing. I think they should cover those areas. I personally will not be voting tonight for putting market rate housing there, but it's a closer call in my mind, but that's where I am at the present time. Are there, just hang on before we go back to the folks who've already made some comments. Commissioner Hilton, did you want to say anything on this one?
Yes, I've studied the proposal by staff about Montana and north-south cross-town routes, and even they say that there's significant land costs and there would be a need for multi-parcel. Also, as a contribution, the yield of affordable in relation to market rate would be insufficient to contribute to the RHNA 40-60% requirement.
Okay, I think you covered probably 3 of our topics there. Just to be clear, right now we're only talking about the issue of along the boulevards, and we're not talking about the cross streets yet, going from R1 to R2 or the triplex proposal or something that. But I hear what you're saying. Okay, and then I saw Commissioner Kamner and Vice Chair Buchanan wanted to comment on this. I just wanted to give everybody a first shot before we went to second shots. So Commissioner Kamner and then Vice Chair Buchanan.
I mean, I feel like we're all kind of on the same page about this, that affordable housing is a lot less feasible on existing commercial areas, and inclusionary programs are less likely to yield affordable housing and are going to yield it less if it does happen. I mean, like obviously it would be the best outcome if we could make all housing affordable, but it's an economics problem. So I still think this is an important way to increase housing opportunities and build the economy and meet our our total RENA. So it's still a net good, but so I just can't see how we could say anything like it could only be affordable housing. Like that's just not realistic economically.
Okay. Vice Chair Buchanan?
So I'm just going back to what's in the draft, and where it talks about the housing element. I mean, the key focus of the housing element programs is housing production with substantial emphasis on affordable housing production. And this is a city where basically all of the property is extremely expensive. Some, yes, areas more so than others. And I think instead of what I feel sometimes is just falling back on the fact that, oh, well, it's too expensive there, so let's not look in, we can't go there, we shouldn't do it. I think that part of what needs to happen, we need to realize that in 8.5 square miles, we're going to have to use, land throughout, property land throughout the city. And because if we don't, we're going to end up doing what we've been doing up to now, concentrating it in certain areas. So I think that part of what has to happen, and I'm certainly no economist, I can't, speak with any authority on the economics of the whole thing, but I think that saying that some areas it's too expensive, I just think that becomes an excuse as opposed to, let's figure out a way that we can do that, that we can get around that we can work with that I don't know. Like I said, I'm not an economist, but I just feel like it's just really easy to say, well, it's too expensive to do that there. Well, who's making it that expensive, and why are we continuing to support that? And it certainly isn't going to help us further our goals as a city.
Okay, are there any people who want to make motions on this topic? Commissioner Hamilton?
Before we make that motion, I do concur with Commissioner Kamner's view that if we were to limit this to affordable units, we would likely not see any production, particularly really on any of these boulevards. And so, reviewing this substantial, one of the attachments is in our committee tonight was just a substantial amount of shortfall there is in building affordable housing, and we need these inclusionary fees. So I guess I see this as a way for us to build market rate housing and hopefully subsidize production of affordable housing at the same time. But to make it purely affordable housing, I think would ensure that nothing would be built. That's my concern. So I'd like to see this motion go forward just without the requirement for a pure affordable housing on these boulevards.
So are you making that motion to
I
support
guess I
the
will.
staff recommendation?
I will support the staff recommendation.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, any need for further discussion?
Could you restate the motion?
Yes, the motion is to support the staff recommendation that there be upzoning on the portion of Montana that doesn't currently have housing. I think it runs from something like 9th Street or 7th Street to 25th Street. The portion of Main Street that doesn't currently have housing on it, and the portion of Ocean Park Boulevard that doesn't currently have housing on it. And the details are in the housing element report. So the question is, the motion is to support the staff recommendation on that. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Hilton?
I thought the staff report questioned the land cost.
You're getting, there are two other subtopics here. We're going to get next to the question of whether 7th, 14th Street and 26th Street, north of Montana for the first two and north of Wilshire for the second one, ought to be changed from R1 to R2. That's also a proposal. And then there's a discussion of where they discussed land costs of whether you could generate affordable units or not by allowing change zoning in the R1 areas. And there is a proposal to allow triplexes. I think it's essentially in the north of Montana area. So those are, but we haven't gotten to those yet. So this is just about along Montana, along Main Street, and along Ocean Park Boulevards. So on the boulevards themselves, not in the other part of some upzoning to encourage housing in those areas. Okay, so do you have the motion in mind, Commissioner Hilton?
Yes.
Okay, and I take it to maker and the seconder, I've accurately explained the motion?
That is correct.
Okay, so let's take a roll call vote. So Commissioner Hamilton,
Yes.
Commissioner Kamner, Commissioner Hilton,
Yes.
Vice Chair Buchanan,
Yes.
and Chair Soloff votes no, so that will pass 4-1. And I will exercise my right to just confirm what I said before, is at the moment I'm concerned by those who have raised this question of whether these are iconic shopping areas and whether we do this in the housing element or not. If those concerns can be adequately addressed, it can be done at a later time, but I'm not satisfied yet that I am comfortable with the answer to that question given these concerns that have been raised. I would support and will support when we talk about the affordable housing overlay that there be allowed to be 100% affordable housing on those sites. And at that time, I'll address how I think we could make that happen. But okay, so that passes 4-1. And Commissioner Hamilton, could you type in an email just what the motion was again, so that we get that at the end of the meeting? I'm writing down the votes,
Sure.
but just a shorthand of what they
Yeah.
were. Okay.
It's essentially item 4B in the goals of.
No, I know what it is.
Yeah.
Just
I'll send that over.
put it in a writing so that at the end of the meeting I have this, and I'll use that to help compile the draft minutes. Okay.
Absolutely.
That's all. Okay, so then the next thing I have is the proposal to switch oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I think I have confused two issues, because I think the original idea was to explore triplexes everywhere. I think the conclusion was, correct me if I'm wrong, others, the ultimate conclusion of staff was that wasn't really going to work. So I thought this R2 zoning on 7th, 14th, and 26th Street was their sort of revised version of that program. we can talk about whether it should be something different, but I think in terms of what the staff actually included in the housing element draft, I think it was this R2 change on those 3 streets rather than doing triplexes throughout the R1 neighborhoods. That's my recollection of what they did. Does anybody have a different recollection of what they proposed? Like I said, we can talk about whether we want to do something different than that, but I believe, to be accurate, that's what they proposed. They, the staff. Does anybody remember that differently? Do you remember that differently, Vice Chair Buchanan?
No,
Okay. So now why don't we talk about their proposal and in the context of that, if someone wants to say their proposal didn't go far enough and it should be R3, triplexes everywhere or whatever, I think that would fall under this topic. I just wanted to try and accurately reflect what I understand the current draft of the housing element says. So first, Vice Chair Buchanan and then Commissioner Kamner.
so I don't know if this is appropriate, but a comment just popped into my head about the motion that we just passed.
Okay.
Just something, is it appropriate to at least say it to get it off my, or
Sure.
what?
Go ahead.
So just in regard to the fact that those areas, Ocean Park Boulevard, Main Street, Montana, are iconic shopping areas, and so it could disturb the, that if we made these changes. I find it interesting that there's concern about that, but there was very little concern about the iconic nature of Pico Boulevard and the shopping area along Pico there when they decided to change storefront sizes and all of that. To me, that's sort of symbolic of the issue that we're trying to eliminate, which is.
If I could just respond to that, I personally opposed those changes along Pico Boulevard. In fact, I went on the walking tour and I spoke at the Planning Commission against them. In fact, I'm more worried about them in Pico because I think that we should be driving all development away from the Pico neighborhood, particularly market rate development, because that will gentrify the neighborhood. I actually am less concerned about putting affordable housing there because I think that's one of the ways of actually preserving the neighborhood, is precisely because we have the people, the biggest concentration of people who already live here, who need that housing, are there. And based on discussions I've had with people, a lot of them would prefer to stay in the neighborhood rather than move to other parts of the city. So that's my overall perspective. And I can tell you the people who have raised to me the issue on the shopping stuff were also opposed to that. So you're right that there are other people in the city who don't see any problem with gentrifying the Pico neighborhood. So
No, I'm not saying it was you or any of us where I see the problem. The problem is, I think, just that this is in the housing element and the concerns are being brought up, but we don't have the Pico neighborhood in there now to keep it from being gentrified and all of that. I just
didn't understand that there is a proposal right now to upzone that. When we get to the question of the general upzoning, I actually personally do have views of that, and even if we're going to do it generally, I oppose it which I may not support, but if to the extent I did, I don't think we should be doing it along Pico Boulevard, precisely to drive whatever new market rate housing development out of that neighborhood and along, Santa Monica and Wilshire.
I just found it interesting that that the iconic nature of these three is sort of front and center, and that as far as the Pico neighborhood was concerned, yes, the Pico neighborhood was concerned about it. We were concerned about it, but the city as a whole didn't really give it a second thought. And that's
I understand what you're saying.
that's
And
what
I
I
think the
find
distinction is,
interesting and problematic and kind of a symptom and a reason for a lot of stuff that goes on in this city.
now I understand what you're saying. I think the argument that people would make that is different is that, and maybe they're wrong about this, is that we draw a lot of people from LA and other places that tend to come to visit and spend their money from outside the city in those places. If you're telling me that also happens on Pico Boulevard, then it certainly would be the same. But it's mostly an economic argument, is the
Well,
argument, at least that I've heard.
Yeah, and that's the problem.
Understood.
Your things
But
based-
anyway, I think Commissioner Kamner wanted to kick us off on the issue of the R1 to R2 or triplexes. I thought I saw your hand, or am I wrong, Commissioner Kamner?
No, I did have my hand up. Thank you.
Okay, so why don't we get to that discussion?
Okay. Forgive me, I don't remember how many units like R2 versus R3 is. Like, could somebody just help me out
Sure,
with that? Really
hang on a second. I actually have open on my desktop the what R2 is. In a second here. We'll find it for you. Oops, at least I hope I do. I may have closed that one. I see I have the municipal code open to accessory dwelling units, home sharing. Oh, that was because for a different purpose. Okay, hang on a second. I will find it for you.
Okay.
If you just give me a minute, but if you have more general comments, you
right.
can do that while I'm finding this.
Okay, let me make general comments. So, I think there are a lot of things that we're all on the same page about. We all agree that affordable housing is extremely difficult to build on existing commercial uses. And so that's especially the case on boulevards where we have like a lot of commercial sites. We have like a limited number of public sites for affordable housing, limited amount of public funding for housing. Plus, big picture in the city, we don't want to perpetuate issues of gentrification in the Pico neighborhood. And so like we want to direct development elsewhere in the city. Putting all of those things together, how could we not conclude that we need to do a lot of zoning in the R1 neighborhood to make inclusionary programs feasible there so that we're creating affordable housing? I mean, like that's the only place remaining that we can consider for an impactful inclusionary program. Plus, there's the important issue which Vice Chair Buchanan brought up, which is like the history of exclusionary zoning and the history of racism in the fact of R1 zoning. So I just don't, like, as a commission, how else are we going to support affordable housing creation here other than through an inclusionary program that's like focused on the R? So it can't be triplexes. If we're gonna think about something like that, it has to be something bigger. Like, I think that 6 to 8 units is something that's totally in scale with what's in those neighborhoods already. Like those giant mega mansions that are there, like they could already fit 6 to 8 units, so it looks the same. We already have lots in Santa Monica with like medium density buildings. So I think it's a totally in character with the city, with those neighborhoods, and then that would allow us to at least have some affordable housing created. I mean, like, honestly, I think it's probably not enough, but maybe we can start there, like recommending something in that range. But I don't know what like our designation that is. Is that R3?
So I have the R's in front of me now, so I can read them to you if that would be helpful.
Yeah.
So this is Chapter 9.08 of the Municipal Code, and R2 low density residential. Here's the description. This zoning district is intended to provide areas for a variety of low density housing types. These include single unit housing, duplexes and triplexes, low scale multi-unit housing, townhouses, and courtyard housing with at least 2,000 square feet of parcel area per unit, exclusive of city and state density bonuses. Accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units are also permitted. And then there's some stuff about what kind of commercial things are allowed in R2. And here's what it says about R3, which is called medium density residential. It says this zoning district is intended to provide areas for a variety of multi-unit housing types with at least 1,500 square feet of parcel area per unit, exclusive of city and state density bonuses, or 1,250 square feet of parcel area per unit, not including city and state bonuses, for projects that provide identified community benefits. And then, just so you know, R4, which is high density residential, that says this is the zoning districts intended to provide areas for multi-unit housing at greater intensities than other residential districts. Housing types include single unit housing, 3 to 4 story multi-unit housing projects, duplexes and triplexes with at least 1,250 square feet of parcel area per unit, exclusive of city and state density bonuses, or 900 square feet of parcel area per unit, not including city and state density bonuses for projects that provide identified community benefits. So those are the technical
Thank you.
zoning
I guess
description.
I'm sure. It sounds like R3, but I'm not totally sure. But R3 seems like a very good step in the right direction for achieving affordable housing in neighborhoods historically, historically exclusionary and tied to issues of racial segregation.
Okay, are there other commissioners who want to comment on this item before we see whether there are any motions or not? Okay, not hearing anybody else. So when we talked about this like a year and a half ago or something like that, my concern with all of this was whether we're going to, upset people in the community, and are we going to accomplish anything for it, or will it actually be counterproductive to our affordable housing goals by making people hostile to supporting things that in my mind are more meaningful opportunities for creating affordable housing, which include continuing to get them to pass taxes for affordable housing. And in the current context, I think our best opportunity for actually making things real is taking the hundreds of millions of dollars of public land that we're talking about and putting all of our resources into creating cost-effective housing on those sites. Judging from what's been happening with all of that in the reaction to all of this proposals, I think that is what's happening based on what was said by staff at the Planning Commission and the study that was done by HRNA, both in terms of what it would take to actually create any affordable units and the reality of what's been going on in places like Minneapolis and other places that do this, that it's sort of a symbolic act, not really going to generate anything very meaningful. And so I guess in my mind, if there's significant public opposition to it, which I think there is, and we're not going to accomplish much, I think it's actually counterproductive. I also don't think it needs to be in the housing element. As I say, with all of these things, whether it's in the housing element or not, if there does come a community consensus to do this, whether it's in the housing element or not, it can be done. It's not that we're bound by what's in the housing element to not do anything in addition to that. So if a case could really be made or there was public acceptance of it, it would really make a difference. We could still do that. So those seem to be, from my observations of the Planning Commission meeting, what moved them to not support this recommendation. And I'm convinced by their discussion and these other points, so I won't be supporting it tonight. Commissioner Kamner? And we can make a motion and vote too, at whatever point people want to.
There's no evidence of any relationship between upzoning in an exclusionary zoning neighborhood and people then deciding that because of that they're not going to vote for money for affordable housing. Like I know that there's absolutely no evidence of that. So I'm not sure like where that concern comes from. And I think it's also I think it's like a very it's like a very negative portrayal of the people of Santa Monica to think that they would like retaliate on something like totally unrelated to reduce money for affordable housing. Like I'm not sure where that comes from, honestly. It is required to be in the housing element. It's because the housing element is required to affirmatively further fair housing. They're just definitely required to be in it. I agree that this could just be a symbolic gesture, and I think that's why this commission really needs to make a better recommendation on this, so that we're recommending something that is actually going to have an impact on housing production and affordable housing and inclusion, and not something like triplexes, which that would be more likely to not have an impact. So I think that's where it's really critical for us to say, okay, like we need inclusion, we need affordable housing in these neighborhoods. This is the only real way to do it.
Okay. And the only thing I'll say is just I don't agree with your analysis of what the legal requirements are for affirmatively furthering fair housing. That means you have to eliminate R1 zoning. So, okay. Any other discussion? Does somebody want to make a motion?
I'd like to comment on affirmatively furthering fair housing, but also the state's companion, Assembly Bill 686. For me, it's not the size of the multifamily in the R1, but the yield of units and who benefits. And there's been a lot of reference to site opportunity, I'll call it, and achieving diversity in that R1 zone. It does say under Assembly Bill 686 in the staff report, it's on the third bullet staff report handout. I don't know the page number, they're not numbered. It says, quote, site inventory to not only accommodate the RHNA, unquote, but also, quote, serve the purpose of replacing segregated living patterns with truly integrated and balanced living patterns. And two comments is that rezoning doesn't accommodate the RHNA because the affordable housing is absent or it's negligible. And the second comment is that in the case of 4 stories, I think the state is saying it has to be at least 4 stories on those R1s, is you get 1, 2, perhaps affordable units out of the 12 and 16. So that rezoning of a 4-story hardly meets the definition of truly integrated. You need at least 20 to 30% affordability, and you're never going to get it. So the reference to diversity and achieving diversity, it wouldn't occur in the case of rezoning.
Okay, is there anybody who would like to make a motion? Commissioner Kamner?
Okay, I have two ideas for motions for this.
Okay.
One, I mean, maybe you all can give me an indication of whether or not these might sound good to you all. But one motion would be to recommend to the city council to direct staff to analyze an inclusionary program that would yield the maximum number of affordable housing units in R1 neighborhoods.
Different from the HRNA study that was done of this issue?
Did it do R1 neighborhoods? I'm sorry, I don't know.
So they have you may be talking about something different, because they did do, if I can find, there's so many things open on my desktop. Okay, it's not that one. Well, if you go to the agenda to do it, you'll see there's one that says HRNA, JKA, and Danieli and Associates R1 Development Standards Analysis.
But did they complete the analysis?
Well, so
I don't
I'm just saying, so that's what, so they did, here's what their description is of what they did. HRNA, with the support of 2 design firms, tested the feasibility of permitting multifamily units within existing R1 development standards. So that's not to change the standards. And then 2, requiring an inclusionary unit with these multifamily buildings. Danieli and Associates and John Kaliski Architects developed general specifications for the physical parameters of 2 through 6 unit prototypes, aiming to respect existing R1 and or R2 standards, but noting where flexibility would be needed. Prototype details, feasibility findings, and key considerations are on these slides. And they basically, it's summarized in the report, but it was basically that in order to get an inclusionary unit, I think you had to, you certainly couldn't do it for, I think it says inclusionary, 4 units with flexibility to the R2 standards, and I think that was only achievable potentially north of Montana because of how much would be. Oh no, I take it back. I think it's you need 5 units with flexibility to do that. Anyway, so that's what they looked at, was what would you have to build in R1 or R2, and what else would you have to change in order to get an inclusionary unit with whatever else you're doing. So that's what they've done so far. As I apologize, the phone ringing. That's what they've done so far. So are you proposing something beyond that? Which you may be. I'm not arguing with you. I just want to be clear that this is what they produced that led them to what staff ended up putting in the draft.
No, I thank you for filling me in on that. I think that's great that they did that. I think I was suggesting looking at what would create, what would maximize affordable housing production, not just what would be the minimum that could create affordable housing. So I think that's a little different, but I'm very encouraged that they did do that study. So that's great.
Okay. I think you said you had 2 different sort of general concepts you wanted to float before making a formal motion. That was one of them.
The other one was recommending R3 in the R1 neighborhoods with an inclusionary program.
Okay. Well, I where I stand, so that's not the the question. So it's really do either of those hold some interest for Commissioner Hamilton, Vice Chair Buchanan, or Commissioner Hilton? If there isn't generally interest, we can probably move off this topic.
I have a motion based on my reference to site inventory, accommodate the arena, but
Okay,
also
but we're not on that one yet, Commissioner Hilton. I apologize, but we are trying to do each item at a time. I promise you we will get to that. So just to try and tie this one up, is there anybody who wants to take up either of those suggestions or some other version about what we ought to do in terms of zoning some part of, leaving aside the 100% overlay, which is for 100% affordable overlay issue in R1, which I think is a separate discussion. So I'm not hearing that we're likely to get any consensus on this one tonight. So unless somebody feels strongly otherwise, I think we, as a commission, we don't have position on this. And
I have a motion.
So Vice Chair Hilton, could you, if you would indulge me, there are just two other points that we agreed we would talk about under the topic of diversity, inclusion, and site selection, and then I promise you we can go to yours next if that's where you'd like to go. But the other two was whether we should be saying that there should be an overlay in these same areas for 100% affordable housing project of at least 4 stories or not. And then the other topic is this, have we adequately surveyed people? So that was the other one. So why don't we see about the 100% overlay? The Planning Commission also elected to not recommend that in these areas. And I'm with where the Planning Commission came out for the same reasons I've discussed. But so that, just so everybody knows where I am, and the other 4 of you ought to make your comments about this, and then we'll see whether we need a motion or not, or whether there is a motion on this one or not.
Just for the record, I don't see a lot of public benefit in rezoning R1, especially given the HRNA analysis, which basically shows that you have to build, and they only analyzed 2 neighborhoods, the Wilmot neighborhood and the Sunset Park neighborhood.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to clarify one thing, because this was a big point at the Planning Commission meeting. Although they call it Wilmot, they actually mean north of Montana.
Okay.
It's mislabeled in there, just so you know.
Didn't even bother. Okay, thank you for that clarification. What it concludes is you'd have to, in order to create just one low-income unit, first of all, you couldn't, you'd have to build a total of 5 units. That is, so basically we are, and 4 of those units would be market rate units at very high income levels, especially if you're going to be supporting the land costs you'd be paying in the Wilmot, north of Montana neighborhood. And so really what you're doing is, I don't think if your goal is to increase diversity in these neighborhoods, what you're actually doing is moving in, if we can accept the premise that, white people, just to say it, are going to be paying market rate rents at a higher rate than, say, people of color, you would basically be moving into these neighborhoods, a very non-diverse population, in order to create one unit on these properties. And I just don't, I don't see that as, I think there's other ways for us to increase the production of affordable housing that will actually yield more units and will spread our public dollars around in a better way. And I do think there's this issue that we have to take into consideration that if we are going to maintain a broad consensus for our affordable housing goals, something like this is a way it could potentially drive a wedge, and we'd be driving a wedge for not a very significant increase in our overall goals of building affordable housing and also in increasing diversity. So I just I have a hard time supporting that. And I'll just add too that, if our goal, there's no guarantee that, any diversity would increase in these neighborhoods just because we're bringing in one low-income unit. They're really, we don't really, it's really hard to say. We have, there's no barrier of entry right now in purchasing a home and having that home financed anywhere in Santa Monica based on what your personal background is. And so home ownership is open to everybody right now. We thankfully have jettisoned a very, very unkind and racist public policy a long time ago. So, right now there's no barrier of entry in making these neighborhoods diverse as they are. And I think that, but I just don't think that this is the right way to go. I'm in support of a lot of other ways of building affordable housing throughout the city, but this is not one of them.
Yeah, Commissioner Kamner, then Vice Chair Buchanan.
First of all, 5 units is only 2 more than what can be built on those lots currently. So I think that's looking at like a very minimal inclusionary program. But more importantly, we're not just talking like, it's not just market rate and one affordable unit. We're talking about, even if it was just like 5 units, we're still talking about 4 market rate units that are significantly less than a single family home. So, even though those are market rate units, they're still cheaper than what is currently, limited there in these neighborhoods. So, that's why we see in other neighborhoods in Santa Monica that don't have R1 zoning, and don't have an inclusionary program, like don't have deed restricted affordable housing, there's a lot more diversity and racial diversity and income diversity in those neighborhoods just because they're allowed to be apartments and condos instead of just single family homes. So I think like in our own fair housing assessment, the relationship between zoning and income diversity and racial diversity is really clear. All right, did I go out for a second? I'm sorry. I think my internet's going in and out.
Oh, I can hear you.
We heard you.
Yeah, I heard you.
Okay. Well, anyway, that was all I was gonna say about that. It's like I just don't think that's like a correct assessment.
So can we just clarify? Are we still talking about the the R2 R3 thing, or because I thought we were moving on to the question of whether 100% affordable housing project. I'm perfectly happy if people want to keep discussing that topic. If people want more discussion on it, but I thought we got to the point it was clear we weren't going to have a consensus on that, and it wasn't worth motioning and voting. And now we're on to the next topic, which is whether 100% affordable housing ought to be a permitted use in the R1 areas, which I believe in the staff original proposal, which was not accepted by the Planning Commission, but it was minimum of 4 stories. So this would be to build, a 4-story, 100% affordable housing project in the R1 neighborhoods, assuming you could assemble the land to do it. So, like I said, if people feel like it's important that we keep talking about the other one, but I think people have sort of laid out their positions, I was hoping we could move to this one so we could see if there's something on that, and then we could talk about, just come to a conclusion on your survey issue, and then we could go to Vice Chair Hilton's motion that he's anxious for us to consider. So I'm just trying to, apropos of what everybody told me at the beginning, that they would like this not to go till midnight, trying to see ones where we look like we're going to get to something as opposed to ones where we don't agree and move on from those. So, so are we okay moving on to the 100% affordable, or people want to keep talking about the R2, R3 thing yet further?
I'm okay moving on if that's the consensus.
Okay. So now we're on that one, and as I said, for similar reasons, I'm with the Planning Commission that this is not the time to try and do something like that. So are there people who want to argue that we should do that now? Or are there people who want to have us take a position on that one way or the other, or people want to leave that one alone and move on? So Vice Chair Buchanan and then Commissioner Kemner. And Vice Chair Hilton, if you ever want to speak, obviously, since I can't see you raising your hand, just go ahead, Vice Chair Buchanan.
So given that the housing element covers a period of time, that it's not just the next few months or the next year, and given that I do believe there are barriers to diversity in the R1 neighborhoods, primarily it's the cost of homeownership in those neighborhoods. It's just extremely prohibitive, and it's not something that someone who lives on, a lower income or a fixed income could even, yeah, they can dream, but it would not be a reality. And it's my understanding that recommending that, including in the housing element, that this is like something that or adding this as a possibility, or adding this as or saying that it's no longer an area that's zoned just for single family homes, is not going to mean that anyone can go in and change what's there currently, or force people to turn their lots into, multifamily units, or force them to build, anything other than what's already on their lot. So I think closing the door to that possibility would be foolish, and leaves out a possible, a possible way of increasing affordable units in the city, even if it's not on a large scale. And I just can't get past, what are yes, it's more expensive, but what are the reasons that the people in these neighborhoods are opposed to this? I don't think we should close the door, especially since we're not saying you have to do this. We're saying you can do this. And I have to agree with Commissioner Kamner that there are like of one in particular, there are sterile, modern McMansions that look like apartment buildings or offices that certainly don't add anything to the neighborhood, don't uphold the character of the other, the beautiful homes that are there, and I just, not wanting a lot. I don't know. It just feels more like not wanting more people in the neighborhood. That it's something more than just preserving the character of the neighborhood is exclusionary in, I think, those areas in and of itself, because they're basically white neighborhoods anyway, and so I don't think we should close the door and say no to this.
Okay, Commissioner Kamner.
Vice Chair Buchanan's points. I strongly support the 100% affordable housing overlay. It's hard to imagine any reason not to do it. So, I'll just go ahead and make a motion that we recommend it to the City Council.
Okay, so this is a motion to recommend the staff, to support the staff recommendation to council on the 100% affordable overlay in the R1 neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, seconded. Is there further discussion? Okay, then we'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Hamilton.
No.
Commissioner Kamner.
Yes.
Commissioner Hilton.
No.
Vice Chair Buchanan.
Yes.
And Chair Soloff votes no, so that fails 2-3. Just taking a note here. And Commissioner Kamner, if you would add to your email, if you could just, date that so that at the end of the meeting I have that wording. I'd appreciate that. Okay, the last topic I have in this area, and then before we turn to Vice Chair, he's been Chair, Vice Chair, and now Commissioner, and the times I've been on there, so I apologize. To Commissioner Hilton's motion was you, Commissioner Kamner, we had some discussion before about this issue of inclusivity and outreach and the like. So is there a motion you want to make on that one?
Yeah, and this is
no, it's not. We're almost there, Commissioner Hilton. Right now, we're still finishing this one up. Commissioner Kamner, we had some discussion at the beginning about what the nature of the outreach was. I read what was in the housing element. Commissioner Kamner raised rightfully that the goal should be to try and get input from all aspects of our community. So I'm just asking, does she have a motion that she wants us to consider on that topic, or we move to you, Vice Chair Hilton?
I'd like to make a motion on this. Before I make a motion, I'd just like to understand if this is something that the other commissioners agree with, and sort of like what level of detail they would want in a motion like this.
I guess just speaking for me, unless we have some concrete proposal that's clear that hasn't been covered, that's going to do something, I just don't feel we'll be advancing what City Council is going to do Tuesday night. But so if you have something concrete to evaluate, I'll support that. I'll evaluate it and may support it. If it's just sort of a general statement, I don't feel it will help them very much. But that's 1 out of 5, so the others should speak. for themselves about what they're looking for here. I guess my suggestion would be, given the lack of particular enthusiasm, is that maybe you ought to make this as a personal comment and not try and make it from the commission. But if you want to make a motion and try and do it now, you can. I leave that up to you. I don't mean to be preaching. I'm just
It's
not
okay.
getting a sense that we're likely to do something that's going to advance.
I'll make a personal comment about it.
Okay. Okay. So now, Commissioner Hilton, would you tell us the motion you'd like to make and have us consider?
Before I do, there was comments about comparing the household costs and incomes of this between the single family versus multifamily. 47% of the single family homeowners in Santa Monica are housing burdened. And in the case of multifamily, the rental costs are significant, especially with no rent control. So when you add multifamily, there's not a lot of income differences, and therefore there's not significant diversity. Also, in the R1, the only feasibility, and it's in the staff reports, would be for the above moderate, not affordability. So my motion is as follows, and I do edits as I listen to other commissioners. So here's my motion. The rezoning of R1 single family, even 6,500, 7,500 square foot lots, would not accommodate the RHNA nor replace either real or perceived segregation, because the number of affordable housing units and low-income households would be negligible.
Okay, is there a second for that motion?
I don't understand what the motion is. It sounds like a
The
statement.
motion is saying, the motion says that R1 single family, the parcels are too expensive and the yield for affordable units is too minimal, and it doesn't integrate the neighborhood, and it doesn't accommodate the RHNA.
But it sounds like an argument against R1 zoning. I don't understand what the actual motion we'd be voting on would be.
I think Commissioner Hilton, if I understand what Vice Chair Buchanan's asking, correct me if I'm wrong, Vice Chair Buchanan, are you saying, and therefore we should change it so that the zoning would accommodate that, or is this a motion saying, and therefore something else? I think that's the question. What's the therefore from those facts?
Well, all evening we've heard that the rezoning diversifies the city and contributes to the affordable housing allocation, such as the quantified. And I'm saying by this motion that based on costs and based on who does benefit, that it doesn't do that.
Okay, is there a second for that motion?
I still don't understand what the motion is.
Well, let's first see if there's a second, because if there isn't, that concludes this issue. Is there a second for this motion? Okay, not hearing a second, it dies for lack of a second. Okay, I actually would like to take a short break to use the restroom. I'm happy if you guys want to continue while I do that. Vice Chair Buchanan, if we want to just take a 5-minute break to allow everybody to do anything they need to do, we can do that. What's your guys' preference?
I think a 5-minute break would be good.
Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break.
Art, were you all waiting for me?
Yes, we were just waiting to see if you're back. Commissioner Hilton, you're here?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to, if you hang on one 1 minute here. I see in the chat that there's someone who wanted to provide public comment, but they didn't show up on the presenter side of things, which is why this is Miss Marasco. So just so you know, Ms. Marasco, you didn't show up in the same place that Ms. Barton didn't originally, Ms. Zurkowska, which is why we haven't called on you. So I just want to be sure you know you need to call 888-240-2560 and enter meeting ID 306-941-155, followed by pound, and then enter the passcode 7761, followed by pound. This is all on the oral public comment part of the agenda. And hopefully if you do that, you will show up in the presenter side, and then we will give you your 5 minutes. Okay. So now returning to the to the meeting. And going back to our list. Okay. So the next general topic area was inclusionary zoning. And at least what's been presented, as I understand it, by staff is a set of studies that were put together by HR&A, which say that if you want to have 10% on-site inclusionary zoning in different parts of town, you need to have this much FAR and this much, these number of stories in order for it to be economically feasible. Then they also give a figure for if you want 12.5% off-site, those same things, and then they give an example of 15%, and then they have a variety of different calculations that are based on that, that according to HR&A is what would be required in different zones depending what your inclusionary goal was, and then they also in their report indicate that alternatively, you could keep the existing densities and whatever, and you could lower the inclusionary zoning requirement. Just by way of background, it was set up outside the downtown so that for tier 1, it was typically 5% if you did extremely low, and 10% if it was very low, and then 15% if it was low. And then they said if you go to tier 2, you get 50% on top of that. So then it was 7.5% extremely low, et cetera, et cetera. That was resulting in projects that were at the 7.5%. Council temporarily suspended that because that's what we were getting in all of these projects, so that there could be a study of what, in fact, is possible. And so these are the results, and that's been thrown out there. So there's been I think there is an actual in what they sent to City Council, some specific staff recommendation, but at least at the time of the housing element report, there wasn't, that we all looked at in preparation for this meeting. I did not see a recommendation for anything in particular. So that's at least what's sort of out there. And now we can talk about anything we want about inclusionary zoning. So is there something that people want to say about that topic? And then we can have a little discussion and see if there's something then that somebody wants to make a motion on or not. So not seeing anybody else leaping. This is my only observation about the inclusionary zoning, that I don't think that. So to me, one of the problems with all of this is that it's sort of, everything's sort of piecemeal as opposed to some actual real thought through comprehensive plan of how we're going to try and do certain things. For me, I've always been intrigued by the offsite because I think there's a potential for a win-win where the city can get more and the developers can be happier too. At the production meetings that Commissioner Kamner and I and a lot of developers and the people who work for them attended, they actually expressed interest in seeing this option expanded as a matter of pure theoretical policy. If we lived in an ideal world, I like the idea of mixed buildings, but in the real world, I'm more interested in what's going to be our opportunity to make a real difference, not just for affordable housing, but in my mind, also for the question of affirmatively furthering fair housing. I actually think the biggest thing we can do is create more spaces in our community to get people out of concentrated areas of poverty, which exist all around us in LA, and none of which exist inside our city. There's no place in our city, even our so-called redlined and whatever areas that have concentrated areas of poverty as defined by the state and the federal governments. Everywhere in our city is highest type opportunity area, with the exception of the two tracks that are the historically redlined portion of the PICO, which is only high opportunity compared to everybody else. We're an 8 square mile city, so no matter where you are, you're close to all of the jobs, the schools, the better environment, than lower crime than most of these other places. And particularly if that ends up getting coupled with our effort to bring back people who were displaced from Del Mar and the Pico neighborhood by the 10 freeway and by the Civic Center and whatever, I actually personally view that as our best route to accomplishing what I think are the goals. And I also personally think that the best way to make that happen is the city's putting up, or at least is being proposed to put up, and we'll get to that, I guess, is the next topic, but a lot of public land for affordable housing. That's a commitment of hundreds of millions of dollars, and trying to figure out a way then to make that real, some of which will be getting things from other sources. It may be that we want to move to a program where, we're really letting people do in lieu fees along the line of what HRA was saying. It could be higher than our current in lieu fees. If you allow people to have offsite, satisfy it that way, they would have more certainty if we're willing to take the risk of actually making it happen, because right now it has to be in the same area, and then it has to also, it has to be completed before they can do their project. Anyway, I don't know the answer to these questions. I'm not saying that I'm prepared tonight to say the policy is, but that's something that I haven't seen in my mind coherently considered in the context of all of this inclusionary zoning, nor have I seen what in the real world could we really create by doing these different things. So anyway, that's my observation. The most important thing to me would be, before we make any change in the program one way or another, that we do a better job of studying what the real consequences of this would be. So that's my only observation in this topic. I don't know that leads to a motion. That's when I read about this, those were my reactions to it. And I don't know if there are others who want to comment on this, or whether we want to just move on to the next topic. And by this, I mean inclusionary zoning. I don't mean my particular take on inclusionary zoning. Commissioner Hamilton.
Yeah, Michael, I read that report as well, and I kind of came to the same conclusion, that it was some good research with a number of different feasibility studies, but no clear recommendation. But I would just add that looking at the floor heights, I'm generally in favor, especially along the boulevards, of higher density, 4 floors or 5 floors, if well situated, on a high, on one of the boulevards. to me is a good thing. We need a lot more of that in Santa Monica, particularly around our, bigger transit nodes. So, I was gratified to see this. I'm not sure at the same time really if there's going to be any kind of motion we could take or what the city council will do with this at the end of the day. But I think it's a step in the right direction, at least, to start putting this information together and presenting it in the way that it's presented so that people can actually put a real life, sometimes FARs and things like that get, they could be things that are hard to quantify for especially people who aren't in the planning world. To put actual floors in units, to me, was a real benefit of this report. And, to the extent that we can encourage the council to accept some of these higher FAR ratios, I'm totally open to a motion to that effect, if that's what we want to do.
Are there other commissioners who want to comment on inclusionary zoning as it relates to the housing element? Commissioner Kamner.
Sorry, I didn't get what Commissioner Hamilton suggested the motion would be. But I feel like we talked about this a lot already with the R1 issue, and I think it's going to be important for the quantified objectives also. I don't really have anything else to say about it right now.
Any other commissioners? Does anyone want to make a motion on this one? Okay.
Didn't Commissioner Hamilton just say that he might make a motion? I'm sorry if I.
Well,
what I heard him said was he made some comments and then he said, I don't know whether it leads to a motion or not. So that's why I was asking if he wants to make a motion, we can. If not, he can make his comments and we can move on and, we'll see what happens. I mean, one of the things for me, just to be clear, just from the way I approach this is that, even if we don't do something tonight, that doesn't mean it's the last time one can weigh in on these issues. Quite frankly, as I keep saying, doesn't matter what zoning is in the housing element or is assumed, that all that ever will be is a floor, not a ceiling, because there's nothing that prevents other changes. But I'm more than open to anything people want to do tonight. So I leave that to. So I think Commissioner Hamilton, it's sort of up to you. Do you have a motion you'd like to make to have us consider or not? Or Commissioner Kamner, do you have one or not? And all I'm saying is if we have something, let's do it. If there's further discussion, let's vote. If not, though, I just don't want people to feel like if we didn't make a motion tonight and decide something, that means that's the last time we can ever talk about what the inclusionary program ought to look like. For me, the biggest thing is while I agree that there's some good data in there, what I don't feel is really in there or in any of this is a real consideration of what is this really going to mean in terms of yield. And to me, one of the ways of maximizing the yield is, I think, and I'd like this to be explored, and I think, quite frankly, the developers would like it to be explored. I'm not prepared to say this is the right thing tonight, is whether we ought to consider if a big play here is going to be we're putting up land and we're going to need other resources then to do things, whether it's bonding some of the rents, whether it's filling that with some additional money, what we can get from the state and federal governments. I mean, how much there is in their calculation when they talk about public land, they have something about the current in lieu fees, how many units you would need to create certain, what they're estimating or the shortfalls between the land and what it costs to do things. And anyway, that's what I'd like to understand is based on what we think might actually happen in the city, how much are we really going to get for doing this? Because for me, there's a balance between what the public wants. And I don't know what that is on this particular issue. I agree with you. I think the boulevards are a good place to do this so that we aren't displacing existing neighborhoods and doing all of that. Versus what are we actually going to get? And I just think for me personally, to make a good decision about what that ought to be, I'd like more quantification of that. But so that's, anyway, I'm sorry for talking so much. I didn't mean to. I'm just trying to say. So I think it's up to you, Commissioner Hamilton. Do you have a motion? Commissioner Camner, do you have a motion that you'd like to do tonight? Or not on this one?
Well, looking at this, I think, we could craft a motion, something to the effect of supporting a supportable height FAR to accommodate a 12.5% offsite affordable inclusion. So that seems to me to be the most reasonable and aggressive of these various proposals.
Okay, is there a second for that motion?
Second it.
Okay, is there further discussion? Okay, then we'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Hamilton?
Yes.
Commissioner Camner? Commissioner Hilton?
No.
I'm sorry, could you say it again?
No.
No, okay. Vice Chair Buchanan?
Yes.
And I'm going to abstain. So that fails 3 to 1 to 1. And my abstention is for the reason I said, is until I understand better what we're really going to get from that, I'm not prepared to take a position on what the right balance is there.
Okay.
Okay. The next, but could you, even though it didn't pass, Commissioner Hamilton, if you would include that in your email, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
There's 2-1-1, right?
I'm sorry?
2 yes, 2 no, 1 abstention.
No, it's actually 3 yes, 1 no, and 1 abstention. But I've actually been marking down the votes. I just need the language of the thing so that I can say this is what it was. So I put down like a shorthand for what we just voted on, but not the exact wording, which needs to go into the minutes.
Okay.
Okay, the next topic that was identified by Commissioner Camner is the rent subsidy expansion. There is in the housing element the support for expanding the pod. The Planning Commission voted to support that. I obviously believe in that. And to me, the thing that is missing from the housing element is just focusing on the fact that we need to think about what's the most cost-effective way to help the most people. I'll throw out one other interesting thing that some other work I've been doing. Because there are people who are looking at issues such as possibly, setting up a county affordable housing authority and various things. But anyway, in the context of that, there's discussion about trying to use rent subsidy programs paired with acquisition rehab so that while we're paying the rent subsidy, we're also acquiring the building and turning it into permanent affordable housing because it's publicly owned. I don't yet know enough about whether that model is economically feasible and all of that kind of stuff, but that's another interesting development. I don't think it's right now for the housing element itself, but I just thought I would share that with people. That's an interesting concept of whether, and apparently in Los Angeles, the housing authority of the city of Los Angeles is doing that in combination with their Section 8 vouchers. So I think it's something that we as a commission probably ought to explore and provide more information to the city about. as time goes on, but I don't think it's for the housing element. Anyway, so I guess, apropos of that, I'll make a motion that we support, expanded rent subsidy to provide immediate relief to severely rent burdened Santa Monicans. Is there a second for that?
I'll second it.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Okay. Take a roll call vote. Commissioner Hamilton,
Yes.
Commissioner Kamner,
Yes.
Commissioner Hilton,
Yes.
Vice Chair Buchanan,
Yes.
and I, Chair Soloff, will vote yes. So that's 5-0. Just give me a second because I made the motion, so I'm obligated to write down what the wording was. Okay. The next topic, and this was yours, Commissioner Hilton. You made some comments about the quantified objectives. If I can summarize what I understood you to say was that the suggestion that right now we could count on getting 2,000 and something affordable units over the 8 years, you thought was too high based on the calculations you did. Is that a fair summary of the point you were trying to make?
Yeah, the revised quantified is still too high based on the financials.
Okay. Well, I'll say this. I didn't see how they made that calculation. I know there was some discussion. One thing that they acknowledged was off. There was a lot of discussion of this at the Planning Commission, was that there was, at least in the prior analysis, a figure of, I think, $490,000 per unit for an affordable housing unit. And people were commenting, which of course they're correct about, that underestimates significantly what our experience has been. If you're talking about an all-in cost, land and construction. I'm sure Commissioner Hamilton probably knows that even better than I do, although I have seen what the particular, I've seen the data on the actual projects here in Santa Monica. So that may be part of it. Not sure how they're factoring in. I'm not sure what assumptions they made about, the public land and where they're getting the money to do that. Obviously, the land itself is probably about 40% of the cost in Santa Monica, because our land costs are so high. But I don't know where they got that. I agree with you, Commissioner Hilton, that it's not obvious to me, if you're going to just assume existing resources, how you get to that figure. I'm not sure whether that's a motion issue or a question we ought to say that the commission wants to understand where that figure came from. Is there more than that you want to do with it, Commissioner Hilton, and then I'll go to you, Vice Chair Buchanan.
There's a big difference between our local costs and total costs. For example, the the trust fund has a much lower per unit maximum range. And regarding the total costs, according to our nonprofits, is $650,000 to $700,000 per unit. And that doesn't factor in tax credit financing. And that's why our local contribution per unit is much less. but the revised quantified is significantly different than the allocation. And still, we have, based on the mathematics, my calculation, we'd only be able to achieve about 34% based on the AHPP contribution and what we have currently in our trust fund. So that would leave about 170 units, and this is on a per year basis, or 66% short.
Right. I don't mean to interrupt you, Commissioner Hilton, but you laid these facts out before. I agree with you that I'm not sure how they came to the calculation. My question is simply, and therefore, what do you look for the commission to do? I could see us saying, we question that figure and want to understand what the basis of that calculation was to see how they did it. Or is there something more than that that you feel we ought to do? Because I agree with you, it's a questionable calculation without seeing the underlying way that they did it.
Well, I don't know how they came up with the revised quantified, because
Right.
I don't know if they're aware of the cost.
Right. Okay. So are you comfortable with it? We'll convey that we have a question about that and would like to see support for that calculation. Does that address your point? Because I agree with your point that it's not obvious how they get there, but it seems to me it's worth, before saying that wrong, it's worth actually seeing what their argument is for why that is the right number. I'm going to call on you in a second, Commissioner Kamner. I just want to see if I can get from Commissioner Hilton what he wants us to do in terms of action.
So what you're saying is, instead of saying that it's not financially feasible, we're asking them to provide more data as to feasibility.
Yeah, I don't know if they're making some assumption about, what we're going to devote to that, what we're going to get from the state and other sources or not. I'd at least like to know what the basis is. And so, yes, that would be my inclination, but you've raised a concern, so I want to see if you have a different view of what we ought to do. I'm inclined to say, let's ask them to show us the underlying math that gets us there.
I agree, but just to keep in mind the time factor, this goes to council next week.
Right, I understand, but we also should be clear about what's going to happen at council on the 15th. They're not voting that this is the housing element. They're going to be reviewing it and giving direction to staff. So if we say this seems like a questionable figure, either one or two things will happen. Either A, the evidence will be put forward that this is a good calculation, or B, or three things could happen. B, it will be obvious that it's not the correct calculation, in which case council will tell them to modify it, or C, nobody will know, and they'll just simply put the question to them, and then when the next draft comes back, we'll have an answer. So I don't think you should feel like, council isn't going to vote on the housing, and they're going to give more direction about what they want to see in the housing element. That's what's going to happen on the 15th. So that's why I feel comfortable that flagging the issue is adequate. Does that work for you, Commissioner Hilton?
Yeah, and when I gave the mathematics and the 60% above moderate and the 40% affordability, I think planning is assuming that the above moderate at 60% will contribute more than they have in the past. So when I did the calculation earlier, I came up with a, say, 15% contribution, and that was just a general figure. But that's a significant, taking into account a significant contribution, we still have a significant local cost obligation. So I agree with you.
But you raise a good point, which which is a good reason in my mind for why we should ask this question, because one of the discussions that Commissioner Hamilton hooked the city up with someone he knows who actually is doing, without subsidy, moderate rate housing in Seattle and the city of Los Angeles. So it's possible. And one of the things, and we're going to talk about this in the next one, which we've talked about before, which is, an overlay to allow increased height and density for moderate rate housing, not just for 80% and below housing. So it's possible that they're counting on, us actually being able to deliver through the marketplace moderate units, which wouldn't cost us anything. So it seems to me it is worth finding out what the basis of their calculation is. So I know Commissioner Kamner had her hand up a lot, and I appreciate your bearing with me. I just wanted to make sure I understood what it is Commissioner Hilton wanted us to do on this. So Commissioner Kamner is next, and then Vice Chair Buchanan.
I think that this commission should oppose any quantified objectives from the city. It would be helpful to find out more information about where they're getting their numbers from, sure, but the purpose of this commission is to support policies that provide affordable housing for the city, and quantified objectives are the city's plan to produce less affordable housing compared to the actual need. So I don't see how this commission can support something like that, especially if the city has not explored every possible avenue to meet its affordable housing RHNA targets. We should be pushing the city to do everything possible in its power to provide affordable housing. I believe that's our obligation to the people that we serve here on this commission. So I think anything short of opposing quantified objections would be a violation of our duty on this commission.
Okay, Vice Chair Buchanan.
When we talk specifically about the cost per unit, I would want to know, I guess, not just how they came up with their calculation, but I think we also need to know if they have explored methods of construction beyond the traditional methods, because there are, the containers, prefab, all of that significantly lowers the cost. And I haven't seen anything from the city where that's even being entertained.
So I will say one of the goal or a program or whatever, but one of the things they did talk about is changing the zoning to accommodate new methods of not the zoning isn't the right word. The building codes, I guess, to allow new methods, but it's at that level of generality. But so at least there's some acknowledgement of it. I just wanted to be clear about that. Commissioner Hamilton, I think you wanted to say something, and then I have a comment.
Yeah. Well, first I wanted to speak to a couple things. One is I am heartened to see that there is discussion about amending our building code to allow for these alternative forms of construction, be it shipping containers, modular housing, etc. That absolutely is going to have to be the first step. And that needs to be done post haste. And if it is, if we can accommodate those non-traditional forms of housing, I think what we have to do is just wait for the marketplace to respond and actually start producing that housing. I'll tell you, I work day in and day out with affordable housing developers all over, and they are always the first person to try to save on construction costs. In fact, it's a huge deal in our industry and across all industries right now. Just our hard costs are going through the roof. And so everybody is trying to be as creative as they possibly can to drive down those building costs and make those projects feasible. And they're looking under every couch cushion they can find. At this point in time, though, modular holds a lot of promise, and shipping containers hold a lot of promise. I should have invited my fellow commissioners. I just went and toured a shipping container facility down in Carson about a month and a half ago. But as it stands today, the per unit construction costs are still about as high as a traditional stick-built building. And so, we are all at this kind of, I think, inflection point in our industry where we really see that the future is going to be modular. The future is hopefully going to be some kind of shipping container, some kind of prefab. Everybody is really pushing in that direction. And I'm actually working on a handful of projects right now throughout Los Angeles that do contemplate modular and shipping containers. But that being said, the pro formas for these projects are right in line with a stick-built project because the technology is just not there yet to make those, significantly cheaper. Now, you do save some time, and time is money. That is for sure. But when you factor all the additional complexities of building modular, and you got to ship them to the site, and you have to find a empty lot somewhere near your property where you can store the shipping containers while you're waiting to, put them onto the property. By the time you factor all that in, the costs are not significantly different. And so I think that, the first step is to make sure that the city can accommodate this technology when it's available by making its building code as flexible as possible. That to me is like a real threshold issue. But then, we have to also realize that as it stands today, there's not a viable alternative to stick-built that's significantly cheaper. Otherwise, we would be seeing a lot more of those projects happening all around us. So I think I just wanted to give that context and let folks know what I'm seeing. Just my own, what I'm seeing in my line of business is that we're still not there yet when it comes to making modular significantly cheaper than stick-built.
Let me offer a couple of comments as well. So obviously, I appreciate having Commissioner Hamilton, who's a real expert in living this day to day. I'm somebody who avocationally is involved in this, but back when Flyaway Homes was first starting to create its formerly homeless housing and their model of trying to raise private capital to do this as opposed to public subsidies, and they use containers. I did talk to the head of that organization at that time. That was similar, that the main savings they were getting at was avoiding prevailing wages because they weren't going to pay prevailing wages because it was a private operation, and that obviously raises a whole set of other social policy questions and whatever. That's certainly not where the city of Santa Monica is right now and the like. I also just recently had discussions with someone who is in a affordable housing consulting firm and used to be in the city of Los Angeles, and had developed a plan when she was at the city of Los Angeles about talking about how you need to combine this with scale, that doing this in one-off projects isn't going to really save the money, but if we started doing these at very large scale levels, that's where you can actually start driving down the cost. And we're already talking about whether we, if we have enough public land, could get to those scales ourselves, or whether we could partner with our bigger neighbor like Los Angeles in this and try and do that. So I think from what I know as someone outside is similar to what Commissioner Hamilton was just saying, which is everybody's looking to figure this out yet. They aren't quite there, but people are working hard on it, and I think we should be open to it. As to the question of quantified objectives, I guess I have a little different take on that. My understanding, the point of the quantified objective is to identify real world constraints, and then say, in light of that, this is what we can accomplish. To me, it's actually another opportunity to make clear that we could do a lot more if we actually got some support from somebody. I reject the idea that anything we could do at the city level is going to solve the problem, or that it is our requirement to throw every other policy, prevailing wage, people's views about the nature of their community, disrupting existing neighborhoods, etc. I'm not saying that we do it, but that there are competing policies with that. And so I do think it's fair to say, here's the number. It doesn't mean we can't do more if the resources are there. In fact, what I'd like to see the housing element saying is, we want to do more. We'd love to do the entire arena, but please help us. If the idea is leave it all to the city of Santa Monica, that's not a meaningful policy. And even if by some miracle we as a city, because we're so special in terms of demand and whatever, that's a meaningless policy for the state of California. That there's no, in my mind, substitute for real public investment. And I think it's important to make that message clear. And I think the quantified objective, one of it, doesn't change anything. I mean, SB, 30 triggers are off the RENA. Everything's off the RENA, so it's not going to change anything. It's an effort to reflect what is real, and not perpetuate what in my mind has been the lie that has been put to the public by setting these numbers every cycle of always saying we need more low-income housing and then producing the market rate housing either completely, more than it, or in places that don't do it, close, but almost no affordable housing. So anyway, that's my view. But do we have a motion that somebody wants to put forward? Commissioner Kemner, do you have a motion?
I don't have a motion, but the effect of setting low quantified objectives and preserving exclusionary zoning in the city is going to send the message to the state that Santa Monica is a bad actor city.
You were frozen there for a second.
Okay.
I heard we'll send a message that it's Santa Monica's a bad actor city. That's the last thing I heard.
Yeah. The state isn't going to, my internet must be going in and out. The state isn't going to look at the kinds of policies that are being undertaken in this housing element and conclude that Santa Monica is doing everything it can to meet its lower income RENA and to address, issues of land use and zoning here. The state's going to see us as a bad actor, and that's going to further reinforce the idea for the state that it's not an issue of lack of funding, that it's an issue of a lack of action on the local level, especially around land use zoning and streamlining.
Okay. Anybody have a motion? I'll just say, and there's no, you and I debating isn't going to really advance things much, but I will say that I don't think anybody can say that our committing hundreds of millions of dollars of public land to 100% affordable housing makes us a bad actor. So, but we can agree to disagree about that, and we'll see what the state says. Does anybody actually have a motion in this area?
I have an alternative perspective and motion.
Okay.
And it's based on the excellent work of our planning staff, because I think it's over 400 pages. So my motion is the revised quantified objective planning perspective is suitable sites, which is realistic, versus the Housing Commission, which is affordability and the cost. However, based on unknowns about the affordable housing revenue requirements, especially the revenue sources, the Housing Commission suggests we need more data before we can support the revised affordable quantified. And I want to say before you don't motion to second, that I agree those technical working groups were dominated by development community. But I think that what I said at the meetings was that the above moderate looks at their profit margin and the nonprofits look at the expense and the revenue source potential. But I think that as the Housing Commission, we should give the affordability and the cost perspective, and we should forward that to the council. I think that's our responsibility. Planning is different. And a lot of our discussion has been zoning and planning rather than affordability and the cost. So that's my motion.
Is there a second? Okay, that dies for lack of a second. I'd like to make an alternative, which is go back to that we just convey. I don't know that this needs to be a formal motion, that we convey to council that the basis for the current quantified objective for the below market rate, needs to be, that calculation needs to be explained.
Well, didn't I say that?
Maybe I misunderstood your motion. If that's your motion, then I'll second that. Is that your motion?
Yeah.
Commissioner Hilton? Okay, I second that.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? Okay. Oh, Commissioner Hamilton, you wanted to say something about it before we vote?
I guess I don't completely understand the motion. I apologize.
I don't know it need to be a motion. I think it was to convey to the city council that we question the quantified objective figure used for non-market rate housing, and therefore the basis for that needs to be substantiated.
Okay.
We believe it that way.
I think
I don't know that we need a motion, but I think that's
I can support that.
What Vice Chair, what Commissioner Hilton felt we should do it as a motion, and I think that is a sentiment that ought to be conveyed to council.
Okay, then I'm a yes vote for that.
Okay, well, okay, so I'll call on you. Roll call. Yes, Commissioner Hamilton's yes. So okay, yes. Commissioner Kamner.
Yes.
Sorry, you muted so fast. Yes. Okay. Commissioner Hilton.
Yes.
Vice Chair Buchanan.
Yes.
And I, Chair Soloff, will vote yes, so that's 5-0. Okay. Let me make a note since I don't want to put it on Vice Chair Hilton to have to convey that to me.
I'll send you the motion.
Okay. If you have it, then that's great. Okay. The last topic I had from the list we put together before, that's not to exclude if other people had something else, particularly, for example, Commissioner Hamilton, after we get through this, if there's something in the goals or the objectives or whatever the thing was that we don't cover when we finish this last topic that you want us to, then by all means, let's talk about those.
Okay.
But the last one I had is, and these relate to the suitable sites inventory. And I guess I want to make a couple of comments about that. It's also related then to overlays. I've looked at the way the city did the suitable sites inventory. I think it's not done properly. They take on the public land. Let me that's not quite the way I would put it. There are two problems with it. One is if you actually look at the numbers, and I don't know why they did it this way, they create a buffer of 57.9% in the market rate category and a buffer of 8.9% in the affordable housing category, even though 70% that's where 70% of the RHNA objective is. I believe that makes no sense. I believe it's inconsistent with the guidance in the Suitable Sites Guidebook, which indicates that you should have 15 to 30% buffer, and they say particularly for the low income housing. So it should be the other way around. So that's point one. Point two, the way they calculate things to me is sort of inconsistent with what should be our policy vis-a-vis affordable housing and how we should properly be using our affordable housing overlay at the local level. And what the staff did was they originally took what was tier one of our existing zoning, and then they say, for some reason, that on a site-by-site basis, that a third of that should be counted as low-income housing, 17% should be counted as moderate housing, and 50% should be counted as market rate housing. So that obviously has nothing to do either with any realistic inclusionary program, nor does a project that's being built at tier one have anything to do with when we do 100% affordable housing projects in the city, how they're built. We don't do tier one projects. Then they say, okay, we're going to now create a new tier one, which is somehow grossed up, and now we'll do the same calculation there. None of that makes any sense to me. What we should be doing is, and I believe what the guidebook calls for, is you designate sites for whatever kind of housing it's going to be, and then if the site gets taken down for something else, you have to make sure you have enough other sites suitably zoned for it to show that at all times throughout the years that we have enough suitable sites to make up the difference between our RHNA obligation and whatever we in fact have produced. So, for example, I do support, as it's now being modified. You'll recall we discussed and the commission voted, I think it was 4-3, to support higher density and height for 100% moderate projects. I voted against that only because the motion said anywhere in the city as opposed to limiting it to certain parts of the city. The recommendation that's now come out actually does limit it to, I think, certain parts of the city, downtown, Bergamot, and I think certain boulevards. Whether they got it exactly right or not, I don't know, but they're doing the right idea in my mind. And I do favor the idea of our being able to the extent possible, create the moderate rate housing without having to use any public subsidy, so we can be using, whether it be public land or public money, so we can do it. I agree with the Planning Commission that modified it some, saying we need to figure out exactly what that really means. And based on the discussions that Commissioner Hamilton and I had with at least one person who's really doing this in the real world, I think there were some modifications we probably needed to make or consider for it to pencil out beyond simply those changes. So this is another example to me of we can have a general statement in the housing element, but the real work still has to be to figure out exactly how to make it real. But that's one thing. We also ought to have that anywhere in the city, and I don't mean in the existing neighborhoods, but along the boulevards, query whether we exclude PICO for that, we ought to have an overlay for affordable housing projects in the more traditional sense of 80% or below, at least to that same 150 unit per acre density that we're using for our city sites. Quite frankly, I'm hoping we can do better than that when we do the analysis that maybe Commissioner Kamner and Hilton will remember. I asked about at the production working group of it, what height do we have to get to in order for it to be more cost effective to go above stick, because the immediate transfer becomes more expensive, but at some height it would do it, and we get that information. But in any event, we should at minimum stick with that. It's fine to have the 5-story stick projects, and if you do that, then that should be the capacity for those sites for the affordable housing. Affordable housing is built when it's going to be built, is not going to be built at tier 1 levels and the like. So I think that that's the way you get it. That's the proper way to analyze, for purposes of the suitable sites inventory, our capacity for affordable housing. And we will have a lot higher numbers for that. We need to build a much bigger buffer in the suitable sites inventory for that. And then we can look at what we need to do the market piece of it, but it's not going to be what's being put forward in the suitable sites inventory now. We may well have enough. I mean, another thing that makes no sense, that would be a more realistic way to also to consider sites for affordable housing. I mean, I know we're allowed to treat a bunch of the ADUs as affordable because that's how the law's set up. But, you know, the idea that 2/3 of the ADUs, which is based on projections of what we might actually get in the city based on historical trends, are going to be affordable. I mean, that's another unrealistic, piece of things, whereas we all know that those are all going to be market rate units. And they probably ought to be counted that way. Anyway, so I think that there are problems in the way this is done. I'm not looking, this is too complex for us as a commission to try and deal with in this meeting. I intend to be making these comments more generally, but the part that I do think, I think we already took the position, so I'm not sure there's more we need to do, that we do support the concept of allowing moderate rate affordable housing to have some height and density in order to make that feasible, which would be a good way of getting, a significant part of our below market RHNA accomplished without having to divert public resources. And that we also ought to make, so that part I think we've already done. I don't know that we need any further motions on that. But I think, as I understand it, the Planning Commission just completely got rid of the 80% overlay, but I actually think, and I don't know that we need to do a motion on this, but I think we ought to have that overlay along the boulevards, with the possible exception of Pico, if we think that affordable housing in the Pico neighborhood is a bad thing, that it be zoned so that if, the resources do become available and we can do it, that there's no question it's by right. That can be, a 5-story, 150 unit per acre project on all of those sites. So those are my observations about the suitable sites inventory. I don't know if others have observations about it, and then we can decide whether there's anything we need to motion or not. But does anybody else in that general category have anything they want to say? Okay. I don't particularly feel those observations are something that I think it's too complicated to try and deal with in an off-the-cuff thing. I would never, in my normal process, think something like that ought to be discussed and voted on in a a single meeting, so I'm not planning to make any motions on this, but I just wanted to share my thoughts with everyone. Okay, so that's what I had as the list of topics. So Commissioner Hamilton, then we can go to others, but when you were looking at the lists of goals and which ones seem to be more controversial and worth our time and commenting on, are now that we've done it in a different way, have we covered those, or are there others that we ought to talk about?
I think we've covered them. I mean, I was really keen on into two of them, which is the affordable housing overlay and the rezoning of R1. I think everything else, quite honestly, are things that we've talked about before, and I feel like there would be relatively broad consensus on our commission. And so I don't think we need to go back over it.
Okay. Are there any other topics that anybody would like to comment on, or have us talk about in context of the housing element tonight?
Yes. And this is a departure from the discussion about allocation quantified. Part of the housing element is housing stability, and it was mentioned earlier our preserving our diversity program, protecting residents. So I had three topics I wanted to discuss, and we've received public input about rent burden and homelessness, also housing opportunity for our residents and workforce. And of course, we didn't have a local priority wait list until fairly recently. The Housing Commission sponsored 3 meetings with PICO neighborhood residents, and they came to our meetings and raised concerns about credit as an obstacle to get affordable housing. In other words, their residents' workforce, and they said they didn't qualify, and there was a lack of opportunity. So my first motion, and when I went to the technical working group, we had for housing stability a lot of excellent input from people on the rent control board. So this first motion is about credit and our local community and giving them a better access opportunity to our affordable housing based on the public input at 3 of those meetings. So the motion is similar to our renter protection ordinance prohibition on source of income discrimination. The city should adopt an ordinance prohibiting the consideration of credit. For example, if the rent is paid with a Section 8 voucher, or there's an affordability restriction on the unit and or project.
So can I ask a question just to make sure I understand what you're proposing? This is a motion to say that the city should have an ordinance that if it's a Section 8 unit or a deed restricted affordable unit, that the landlord may not consider credit in deciding who to give it to. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because consideration.
No, I just want to, I don't need the explanation why. I just want to be sure I understand what you're proposing.
Yeah, that was my motion.
Okay. Is there a second for that motion? Okay, that dies for lack of a second. I actually, I'm not sure I'm prepared to say it can't be considered. What I would support, and I don't know whether this would be something you'd be interested in, Vice Chair Hilton, is that the city ought to explore having a program to provide credit support to allow people to access those units. You'll recall that we had that house program, didn't ultimately succeed because we were going to pay a bonus to a private landlord if they would take a Section 8 tenant. And the other another inducement we offered was some credit protection, that, up to a certain amount, if the tenant defaulted, the city would step in and pay it. And that second piece of it is something that I could get behind, that we step up to do it. But to say that without our being willing to step up and make sure that they're made whole, that it's illegal to consider that, I'm certainly not tonight. Without more study, I'm not prepared to support that. I just have to understand a lot better what the consequence of that would be. But I definitely would support that we ought to, and I think the city's already starting to do this, support the concept of our putting some resources into that kind of a thing, so that people who have credit problems, it won't be an issue. And then if we pair that with, if we're going to step up to them, that you can't discriminate against them because we're supporting, as opposed to that I could also support. But to just say that without our stepping up, it just can't be considered without more study and analysis, that's why I wasn't prepared to second that.
Then my second.
Hang on, Richard, before we move off of that, is there anybody interested in trying to craft something along those lines, or should we just move on? Including you, Richard, would you be interested in something like that, saying we'd support a city program that provided credit support and made it so you can't discriminate against the use of that?
Well, there are suggestions and programs that do assist low-income tenants with the rent, with the deposit. But I don't know that.
Okay, then let's not try and do it tonight. Let me just say, for your benefit and to the extent that anyone other than us are paying attention to what we're saying here, I definitely think that there's a problem of credit being a barrier to people who need affordable housing getting it, and that we need to address that problem. And I think we as a commission ought to work on how to figure out what makes sense as public policy. I'm just not prepared tonight to endorse that the right answer to that is to simply say you're not allowed to consider credit in those circumstances. So, okay, what's your second one?
Well, the second one is in reference to rent control, and the motion is housing stability and rent control are synonymous. Proposition 21, the November 2020 state ballot measure failed. It was supported by our city council and some 57% of Santa Monica voters. When there's no rent control, large developments tend to raise rents arbitrarily. Renters are priced out and owner profits may decline. The commission supports rent control and urges a public education campaign and regional support to convince Sacramento and our state's residents to support it.
Okay, is there a second to that motion? Okay, that one fails for lack of a second. I'll just comment that I think the city is already on record that we would support the repeal of Costa-Hawkins.
So the Housing Commission, let me clarify, the Housing Commission and 5 commissioners tonight, 4 of whom don't support a resumption of state rent control.
I thought you were talking about Prop 21, which was intended to form Costa-Hawkins.
Right.
And I'm saying the city of Santa Monica the city council has already taken the position repeatedly that the city of Santa Monica supports the repeal of Costa-Hawkins. So advising the city council that they ought to take a position that they're already on record as taking, I don't see what the purpose of that is or how it ties to the housing element. if you're saying that the housing element ought to identify Costa-Hawkins as a barrier our city to affordable housing, then I'm totally with you, and I would support that motion. You
Well,
want to
I'm
make
more-
that
I'm
motion,
more-
Richard, that the housing element ought to say that we think that Costa-Hawkins has been a barrier to affordable housing and that it ought to be changed?
No, because it may have some effect on market rate housing production.
Okay, then what's your third motion?
Well, this motion, just before I get to the third one, is this motion was because there were a lot of misstatements made about rent control, like it hurts the seniors and the disabled. So my third motion is also housing stability. And this is something that's come up a couple of times, is that in our city-funded 100% affordable housing projects, the city requires, and this is in our trust fund legal agreement, we require 15% of the total number of units in the project to have interior accessibility features. And these are for persons with disabilities, and it's a requirement. And I made inquiries, and there's no requirement that the development inform tenants offer the units or keep any record. And in our legal agreement, I think the city needs to add that there be a written description when the property, for example, is developed, such as at lease up or during the tenancy, and that's to inform residents that the accessible units or interior modifications are available. In other words, there needs to be disclosure, and that's to limit liability for the nonprofit, also the city. And the nonprofits, I've discussed it with them, and they agree. So the motion is just, and it would just be to add one more sentence in the legal agreement. Our trust fund 100% affordable housing legal agreement requires that 15% of the units have interior accessibility. An addendum should require the property owner to include a written description at lease up or lease renewal of the availability of the accessible units or interior modifications up to the 15% requirement, and for the property to keep a record of the number of units, interior features, and provide it to the city if requested.
Is there a second for that motion? Okay, that dies for lack of a second. Commissioner Hilton, what I would like to suggest on that is, and we're about to get to the work plan, that you suggest this as an agenda item, or any of these if you want as an agenda item for our regular meeting, which is going to take place in a week, and then provide something that can be, that the commissioners can look at in advance of the meeting, and then we can actually discuss the merits of it and deal with it there. I'm hearing you, and it may have some relevance to the housing element, the issue of making sure that accessible units, so that that's actually being carried out and the like, but I just am not prepared in the context of, hearing about this for the first time at this point to just immediately move to some motion and vote on it. So that would be my suggestion. Okay, anything else anybody thinks we need to cover under this agenda item?
The accessibility requirement is referenced in the housing element, and it's on page 19, 2G, 2.G, and it says, quote, facilitate the development and maintenance of special needs housing, unquote. And this requirement is in 100% affordable housing.
Commissioner Hilton, I'm not disagreeing with you that properly dealing with accessibility is relevant to the housing element. My point was slightly different, which is that to just hear this thing and 2 sentences about it and then a motion for the first time at this point and then to take a vote is not an approach I'm willing to take any more than on the criticisms I have about the way the suitable sites inventory was calculated is something that I would ask any of you, just hearing about for the first time some comments from me, I wouldn't ask you to go to a vote on, because it's a matter of procedure, and you know that I've been consistent about this over 6 years. If it's something that we haven't really, that's complex and we haven't had a chance to get some advance warning and talk about it, I just don't think it works. I don't believe that issue is something that has to be decided by City Council on the 15th or it's lost. That's why I'm suggesting when we move to item 3B, the work plan, that you suggest that we make this an agenda item for our next meeting, which would allow you to provide us, if you want something in writing in advance about this, so we could understand it more fully, what exactly you're proposing, and we can discuss it then and do it. And I don't think it will make it untimely for accomplishing the goals you want. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not arguing with you that it does have relevance to this agenda item. Okay? At least you understand what I'm saying, even if you may not agree with me. Okay, is there anything else anybody thinks we need to talk about tonight under 3A? Okay, hearing nothing, we're closing item 3A. We'll now move to 3B, which is the work plan. And there's only one thing I really want to talk about on this, which is that we have our regular meeting next week. Hopefully we'll have the full commission at that. I know Commissioner Hanson, who, because this was a special meeting, already had a commitment for this evening and couldn't join us, will be available for that meeting. One of the things that was pulled from our last regular meeting, because Commissioner Hanson couldn't attend that, was the subcommittee diversity discussion item. So that for sure we will put back on the agenda for next week. And my only question to my fellow commissioners, that's the only thing I knew of going into this meeting that we really needed to cover in that meeting, but this is a discussion of the work plan. Is there anything else that anybody would like to see on that agenda? So for example, Commissioner Hilton, would you like to see on the agenda for our discussion a week from tonight, a discussion of your item about, the ADA or the accessible units and what you think we ought to do about that? Would you like to see that on the agenda?
No, because tonight the commission hasn't been interested in the 3 topics I suggested, but they're interested in how commissioners are selected, which is not a housing commission normal subject item.
So, Commissioner Hilton, at least speaking solely for me, it's not that I'm not interested in the issue you raised. Where I was is I'm not prepared from just listening to that to be ready to have a motion and vote on it. I am interested, which is why I was suggesting to you that we agendize it, that you provide us with some material in advance of the meeting about what you have in mind, and if you want to say why as well, and so the public can see it as well in advance of the meeting, and then we consider it. So at least for me, where I'm coming from is not that I'm not interested in the topics, it's that I wasn't prepared to go to a motion on it based on that tonight. So, Vice Chair Buchanan.
I would also like to say that my silence has nothing to do with a lack of interest. I think that more discussion was warranted. I wasn't ready to second or vote on any motion on any of those things because they were all new to me as well. Nor does my lack of interest in the accessibility issue mean that I do not support accessibility. want that to be very clear.
Right. So what I would suggest, I mean, you don't have to make a decision right now, Vice Chair Hilton, but I guess in terms of talking about the work plan, if these are issues you want to talk about, they sound like they are issues, what I would ask is, because we have to send out the agenda tomorrow. So if you could send to Vice Chair Buchanan, myself, and to Melinda, a wording of what you think the agenda item should be, and then if you have already what the attachments would be, like your motion or any data you have that you want us to look at in advance of it, do that. If you can't get that together for tomorrow, if you can just get the topic, an agenda statement of it, then we can include it in the agenda. And and if you come up with the attachment on Monday, we can then attach it to the agenda item. So, but you can make the call, but I think you've heard from myself and from Vice Chair Buchanan, our position was not that we're against what you're saying or whatever. It's that we felt that there needs to be more information and discussion before going to a vote. So I guess I would just urge you, if these are topics that you think deserve some discussion and consideration by the commission, that you send us that information so we can include it in the agenda for next week. If you feel that's too rushed, we can do it at our July meeting. Okay. Is there anything else anybody else wants to talk about, either for an agenda item for next week's regular meeting or anything else they want to talk about the work plan at tonight's meeting?
This is for the chair and vice chair. What will be on the meeting agenda for next week?
The only items that right now that will be on the agenda are the subcommittee discussion item thing that was pulled at the request of the subcommittee from our May meeting, because Commissioner Hansen was unable to attend and they wanted the full subcommittee to be present when they presented their information to the commission. So that item will be on there, and the discussion of the work plan, because we always have that, and then a housing manager's report and commissioner's report and general public comment. But the only thing of specific substance other than what's at every regular meeting would be that. And so but before we sent out an agenda that said that, I wanted to take the opportunity tonight to see if there were things that commissioners felt that it was important that we discuss at the June meeting. If so, we would try and accommodate that and put it on the agenda. But it would also be okay if we have a one topic meeting and we don't have to go for large numbers of hours, since we've put in a lot of time with a couple of special meetings, about the housing.
Well, could we hold that one item maybe over, and this is in consideration of the commissioners, but also staff time, could we possibly hold that over to the July meeting, the July regular meeting?
So my only concern about that, and I know we only have one representative of the subcommittee with us tonight, is that at least two members of the subcommittee, their term ends at the end of June. I know at least one of them is not indicating an intention to reapply. I don't know about the other. We also have, and so I thought it made sense to have at least a discussion of it while all three members for certain were still present on the commission. But if the subcommittee feels that it would be better to hold it over to July, it's not an issue from my perspective. It's just that we were going to talk about it. It got pulled for a specific reason. And so I thought we ought to put it back on the agenda. And that was also why I'm reluctant, without hearing from the subcommittee that they wanted to go over to July, to just do that.
Well, in
Mr. Hamilton, it looks like he wanted to. I think Commissioner Hamilton wanted to make a comment, and then it looks like Vice Chair
Well,
Buchanan wants to make a comment.
My only
You can
comment
go
is I
again,
sent
Commissioner
you.
Hilton.
Sorry,
I'm sorry.
Michael. I apologize. I have to step away. I think I've
Okay.
reached the end of my ability to stay on this meeting. I had a
That's fine. We still have
yeah.
a quorum. This is the
I had
last
a-
thing. We're almost ready to adjourn, but it's fine if you need to go. Thank you for your work. Please
wanna
send me
try to
that
be
email.
respectful, but I have a horrible migraine right now, and
Sorry.
staring at this blue screen is I've reached my limit. So I do have
No
to
problem. If you would just go ahead and send me that email of the wording
I
of
will
the couple of
absolutely do
motions you made, I'd appreciate that, because we do want to convey whatever we actually decided to council before the meeting on the 15th.
I'll
Okay,
get that
thank
out
you.
to you early tomorrow. Okay, thanks,
Great,
Michael.
thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Okay. Vice Chair Buchanan.
Oh, sorry. I don't understand why Commissioner Hilton is making this request. We've, it was on the agenda previously. It was pulled. I don't know that there's any special preparation that the staff is going to have to do to put it back on the agenda. So I'm a little just not understanding.
Well, I had an addendum before you made that comment that if the three subcommittee members potentially could only attend a June meeting, that we should have that meeting next week.
Okay. Then unless, look,
I
the
agree.
three subcommittee members were the ones who pulled it last time. I think we should send out the agenda. If they decide for whatever reason they don't want to go forward in June, they'll let us know. But otherwise, I agree with, Vice Chair Buchanan. We already had it agendized. This is a recognized subcommittee. I think they did a lot of work. They gave us a report and attachments and the like, and I think we should hear what they have to say and discuss it. So, okay. So unless somebody feels there's anything else, that concludes item 3B. And we're on to item 4, which is adjournment of the Housing Commission. So thank you very much, everybody, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you.